There's a specific kind of silence you only find deep in the Nevada desert. It isn't peaceful. It's heavy. It feels like the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for you to make a mistake. Emily and I had been on the road for almost a month. We were traveling in a 98 Coachman Class C we'd bought off Craigslist. By week 3, the novelty had worn off. The RV's house batteries were shot, meaning the amber interior lights constantly flickered and the water pump sounded like it was dying. We were emotionally exhausted, running on fumes and instant coffee, bickering over miles per gallon, and whose turn it was to empty the black tank. We just wanted to disconnect. That's why we pulled off a desolate stretch of US 50, driving 3 miles down a nameless washboard dirt road onto public BLM land. It was an endless, flat wasteland of cracked alkali crust and stunted sagebrush. No cell service, no light pollution, not another human being for at least 40 miles in any direction. The first night, we went to bed early. I was dead to the world the second my head hit the pillow. But the next morning, when I stepped out to stretch my legs in the freezing dawn air, I stopped short. About 50 yards out, forming a massive, perfect circle around our RV, was a fresh set of tire tracks. They were deep, heavy treads, churning up the dry, white earth. I traced the circle with my eyes. There was an entry point coming from the north and an exit point heading further south into the absolute middle of nowhere. "Hey, Em?" I called out, my voice swallowed instantly by the vastness. She stepped out, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. She looked at the tracks, her brow furrowing. "Did someone drive by? I didn't hear anything." "Neither did I said. "Probably just a local out off-roading. Taking a shortcut." "A shortcut to where?" she asked, looking at the empty horizon. I didn't have an answer. That second night, the unnatural silence of the desert really set in. The wind had died completely. It was so quiet my ears rang. We had a cheap battery-powered outdoor security camera mounted by the RV door, acting mostly as a placebo. At exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I downloaded the camera's local footage app, which connected via a short-range Wi-Fi network to the camera itself. The screen was filled with violent gray static. No picture, just interference. 10 seconds later, the camera rebooted and the feed went back to the empty moonlit desert. Beside me, Emily shifted. In the dark, her voice was a fragile whisper. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath. "Hear what?" "An engine. It's really low." I strained my ears. I listened so hard my heartbeat drummed in my skull. I heard absolutely nothing, just the dead, suffocating quiet of the Nevada basin. I told her it was the wind, or maybe the RV's propane regulator humming. She didn't argue, but she didn't go back to sleep either. When the sun finally rose, I went outside. My stomach dropped. There was a second set of tracks. They circled our RV again, but this time they were only 20 yards away. I crouched by the dirt. The treads were massive, like dually tires on a heavy rig. They were pressed deep into the dust. The terrifying part wasn't just that they were closer. It was that, to make a circle this tight, a heavy vehicle would have had to crawl at a snail's pace. The gravel should have crunched. The engine should have roared. We hadn't heard a single sound. "We need to leave," Emily said. She was standing in the doorway, staring at the tracks. Her eyes were bloodshot. "We will," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But the engine battery is low. I need to run the generator for a bit, make sure we have enough juice to turn her over. We'll leave at first light tomorrow." By the time the sun went down, the paranoia had fully set in. The desert, which had looked so open and free 2 days ago, now felt like a spotlight. We were a lone, flickering metal box in a sea of blackness. We didn't go to bed. We sat opposite each other at the dinette booth, all the interior lights off to save power and keep our night vision sharp. We stared out the small, dusty windows. Midnight passed. Then 1 a.m., 2 a.m. At 3:16 a.m., the air in the RV seemed to drop 10 degrees. My phone buzzed on the table. The camera feed had dissolved into gray static. "Look," Emily choked out, pointing out the front windshield. Far away, maybe a mile out in the pitch black, 2 pale, yellowish orbs appeared. Headlights. They weren't bouncing or jostling like a truck driving over rough desert terrain. They were gliding, moving with a smooth, predatory slowness. They approached in a wide arc. As the vehicle got closer, the moonlight caught the dull, oxidized fiberglass of its body. It was an old Class C RV, almost identical to ours, just weathered and decaying. There were no license plates, no running lights, just the dim, yellowed beams cutting through the dust. Emily grabbed my hand. Her grip was tight enough to bruise. It reached the 50-yard mark and began to circle us. The only sound was a deep, subsonic vibration, a heavy, rhythmic thrumming that I felt in my chest rather than heard with my ears. It made one full rotation. Then it turned inward, breaking the circle and stopped exactly 20 yards from our windshield, facing us head-on. The headlights flared, illuminating the dust swirling between our two vehicles. The ambient light bled backward into the cab of the other RV, lighting up the windshield. I stopped breathing. The steering wheel was visible. The worn, high-back captain's chair was visible. There was nobody sitting in it. The cab was completely, terrifyingly empty. We sat frozen in the dark, separated from this impossible thing by a thin sheet of safety glass. For 2 full minutes, neither we nor the ghost rig moved. The silence was deafening. Then, without the sound of gears shifting, the other RV reversed. It didn't turn around. It just rolled backward, accelerating into the darkness at a speed that defied the physics of an old heavy motorhome on cracked desert dirt. Within seconds, it was swallowed by the night. We didn't wait for the sun. I threw myself into the driver's seat, cranked the ignition, and slammed it into drive. We bounced violently down the washboard road, everything in the back crashing to the floor, until we hit the asphalt of US 50. We drove for hours without speaking. The heater blasted, but neither of us could stop shivering. Just after dawn, we pulled into a dilapidated Sinclair gas station on the outskirts of Tonopah. The sun was up. The world felt real again. The fluorescent lights of the pumps, the smell of gasoline, the distant sound of a highway, it was all aggressively normal. I got out to pump the gas, my knees weak, the adrenaline finally leaving my system. Emily cracked her window. She looked exhausted, but the absolute terror had left her face. "I'm going to grab us some coffee inside," she said. "Sounds good," I replied, forcing a smile. I engaged the pump lock and walked around the back of the RV to check the rear passenger tires. We'd hit some severe ruts escaping, and I wanted to make sure we hadn't bent an axle. I crouched down. The tire was fine, but as I went to stand up, I froze. The concrete at the gas station was stained with old oil and dried soda spills, but stamped perfectly over the pavement, written in fine white alkaline desert dust, was a set of tire tracks. They were heavy, dually treads, and they formed a perfect, tight circle all the way around our RV. The fog clung to everything like a secret it refused to tell. They'd taken the wrong exit off the interstate. Alex was sure of it now, somewhere past Eugene, where the pines grew so thick they swallowed the sky. The sign for Whispering Cedars RV Park had appeared out of the mist like an afterthought. Faded green paint, crooked post, no phone number. Sarah had laughed at first. "It'll be an adventure for Lily," she'd said. Their daughter, curled in the back seat with her stuffed rabbit, had pressed her face to the window and whispered, "The trees are watching. They should have kept driving." Walter met them at the office, a squat cinderblock building that smelled of mildew and old coffee. He was tall for an old man, stooped at the shoulders, skin like weathered pine bark. His eyes were pale, almost colorless. "Site 17, he said, sliding a key across the counter without being asked. "Good one. Quiet." He didn't smile. None of them did. The park was small, maybe 20 sites tucked between ancient cedars. Every RV they passed looked like it had been there since the Nixon administration. Faded stripes, sagging awnings, satellite dishes rusted into uselessness. The residents were all elderly. They sat in folding chairs or stood by their vehicles, watching the newcomers with the dull patience of stones. No one waved. No one spoke. By dusk, the yellow streetlights flickered on, weak and jaundiced. They painted the fog in sickly halos. At exactly 8 p.m., every RV window went dark at once, as if someone had thrown a master switch. The sudden silence felt intentional. That first night, Lily woke them twice. "They're staring," she said, pointing at the window. "The old people. They stand real still and look right at me." Alex told her it was just the fog playing tricks. Sarah held her until she fell back asleep. But when Alex glanced outside later, he saw a shape between two trees, too upright, too patient. It didn't move when he stared back. The next morning, he walked to the office. The guest register lay open on the counter, a massive leather thing with yellowed pages. Walter was nowhere in sight. Alex flipped through it idly. Names and dates stretched back decades. Many of the same entries repeated year after year. Harold and June Miller, Site 9, arrival, June 12th, 2009. Still here. He closed the book quickly. There was no cell signal, no Wi-Fi. The radio in their rented RV produced only static and the occasional fragment of an old country song that sounded like it was being sung underwater. Lily spent the day drawing pictures of stick figures with hollow eyes. Sarah tried to laugh it off, but her voice sounded thin. Walter grew stranger each time they saw him. When Alex mentioned they'd only be staying 2 nights, the old man's jaw tightened. "Most folks find reasons to stay longer," he said. His voice was low, almost gentle. "The air's good here. Healing." On the 3rd evening, Alex suggested they leave early. Sarah agreed too quickly. They packed in silence while Lily slept. At 11:30, they eased the RV out of the site, headlights cutting weak tunnels through the fog. The pines pressed close, branches scraping the roof like fingernails. They drove for 20 minutes, then 30. The road curved gently, always climbing, always turning left. Alex's hands grew slick on the wheel. The same crooked mile marker passed them 3 times. "Alex," Sarah whispered, "I know." The GPS screen showed nothing but gray static. The forest felt endless, the trees repeating like a corrupted tape. Eventually, the yellow lights of the campground appeared again through the mist. Site 17. Their own tire tracks still fresh in the gravel. They didn't speak about it. They simply returned to their spot and killed the engine. At 3:07 a.m., Alex woke to absolute silence. No wind, no distant highway hum. Even the fog seemed to hold its breath. He sat up. Sarah was already awake, eyes wide. Lily stood at the window, rabbit clutched to her chest. "They're all outside," the girl said calmly. Alex looked. They were. Every resident stood in the gravel lanes between RVs, facing Site 17 in perfect silence. Dozens of them, old men in bathrobes, old women in housecoats and curlers, skin lit gray by the weak streetlights. None of them blinked. Their breath didn't fog the air. Walter stood at the front, closer than the rest. His colorless eyes reflected the yellow light like a cat's. Alex's hand found the door lock and pressed it down with a soft click that sounded deafening. Walter took one slow step forward. The others remained motionless. Then the old man spoke, his voice carrying clearly through the glass and fog, as if the campground itself had lowered its voice to let him be heard. "No one checks out from here." The words settled over the RV like settling dust. For a long moment, nothing moved. The forest watched. The yellow lights flickered once, twice. Lily pressed her small hand to the window glass. One of the old women outside tilted her head very slightly, as if listening to something only she could hear. A smile, small, almost tender, touched her lips for the first time. Somewhere deep in the pines, something that was not quite an owl called out. It sounded almost like a name. The fog thickened, the lights dimmed, and the campground waited, patient as stone, for morning to decide what would happen next. The first night, I thought it was rain. Not the normal soft drumming on the RV roof. The Olympic Peninsula kind of rain that feels personal, aggressive, endless. The kind that fills the forest with a constant wet hiss and turns every surface slick and swollen. I mean something underneath us. A dull scrape under the floorboards around 2 in the morning. I opened my eyes and listened. The RV creaked lightly in the wind. Rain tapped branches against the fiberglass siding. Beside me, Jen breathed steadily under 3 blankets. Our daughter Lily slept in the fold-out bunk above the cab, occasionally snoring through congestion from the cold weather. Somewhere near the kitchenette, our Labrador Murphy gave a low growl, then silence. I almost convinced myself I imagined it until Murphy growled again, low, focused, at the floor. We'd rented the campground outside Forks for 6 nights because Jen wanted one unplugged family trip before school started again. No phones except for emergencies, board games, hiking, fires if the rain let up. It never let up. By the 3rd day, the campground looked drowned. Mud swallowed the tire tracks. Mist hung between the trees all morning like cigarette smoke. Nobody stayed outside long enough to socialize. Most RVs kept their blinds shut. The interior of ours felt smaller every hour. Wet jackets hung from hooks near the door. Damp socks draped over cabinet handles. Condensation collected on the windows each morning and ran down the glass in thin trails. Every movement bumped someone else. Every conversation became sharper than intended. Our son Max hated it from the start. He was 8 and already nervous by nature, sensitive to sounds, scared of insects, thunder, dark hallways. The first morning after the scratching started, he refused to climb down from his bunk. "There's someone under us," he whispered. Jen sighed while making instant coffee. "Honey, it's raccoons or branches." "No," he said. "Someone talks under there." I looked up from frying eggs. "What do you mean, talks?" "I hear whispering." Lily rolled her eyes. "You hear everything." Max looked embarrassed immediately, which made me feel guilty for not defending him harder. That night, Murphy wouldn't settle. The dog sat rigid beside the kitchenette bench, staring downward. Not at the door, not the windows, the floor. A growl vibrated in his chest every few minutes. Around midnight, the RV moved. Barely. A tiny rocking motion like someone shifting weight against one side. Jen grabbed my arm. "Did you feel that?" I nodded. Murphy exploded barking. I threw on boots and a rain jacket and stepped outside with a flashlight. Cold rain hit me sideways instantly. The campground was dead quiet except for the weather. No footsteps, no voices, no nearby campfires. The beams swept beneath the RV, mud, dripping pipes, stabilizer jacks, nothing else. I circled twice before going back inside, soaked through. Jen studied my face. "Well, nothing." But I checked again at 2:15 and again at 3:40 after another scraping sound. Every time, nothing. The food started disappearing after that. Tiny amounts at first. Half a sleeve of crackers, 2 apples, hot dog buns. Jen accused Lily of sneaking food at night. Lily cried and accused Max. Max denied it so desperately that he looked guilty even when he wasn't. I secretly wondered if Jen was stress-eating and forgetting. She thought the same about me. You could feel us silently auditing each other's behavior. The RV became psychologically airless. One rainy afternoon, Jen pulled me aside while the kids played cards. "I think somebody's been outside the windows." "What?" "There were footprints. It's a campground, not near the windows, right up against them." I looked out. The rain had turned the ground to mud. Everything looked disturbed, impossible to tell. "You're scaring yourself," I said gently. But that night I checked the locks 3 times. Max stopped sleeping. Every little sound made him sit upright in his bunk, staring downward. "He coughs under there," he whispered to me one night. I almost snapped at him, because part of me had started hearing things too. Not whispering, breathing, very faint. Impossible sounds hidden beneath rainwater and pipes settling and tree limbs tapping the roof. At 1:12 a.m., Murphy began snarling so viciously that foam hung from his mouth. Then came 3 distinct scratches directly beneath the dinette seating. "Scrape, scrape, scrape," Jen whispered. "Jesus Christ." The RV shifted again, not enough to shake violently, just enough to feel weight moving underneath us. I grabbed the flashlight and stepped outside barefoot before she could stop me. Rainwater soaked my socks instantly. I crouched beside the RV and aimed the beam underneath. Nothing. But this time I noticed the mud, flattened, like someone had been lying there. My stomach tightened. I dropped to my knees and shined the light deeper under the chassis. The beam caught something reflective, an aluminum can. Then another, tucked near the axle. I froze. Murphy barked hysterically inside the RV, and somewhere underneath me, movement. Fast. I stumbled backward so hard I slipped in mud. "Hey!" I shouted. No answer, only rain. I crawled halfway underneath despite every instinct screaming not to. There was barely enough clearance for a person. The flashlight illuminated soaked earth, mechanical lines, black shadows. Nothing else, but the smell hit me. Human smell. Body odor. Rotting clothes. Wet fabric. I backed out immediately. Jen met me at the door, pale-faced. "What did you see?" I lied. Probably an animal. But neither of us slept. The next day, we drove into town and bought a cheap handheld thermal monocular from a sporting goods store. I told myself it was overreacting. At midnight, I used it anyway. Rain distorted the image outside into smears of blue and gray. I scanned the trees first, then the ground, then beneath the RV. The shape appeared instantly. Bright yellow against cold blue earth. Curled tightly under the storage compartment. Human-sized. Human-shaped. Jen made a choking noise behind me. The figure moved slightly. I remember feeling something worse than fear in that moment. Violation. The realization that someone had been physically beneath us while we slept, listening to us argue, listening to our children. Maybe for days. I banged on the floor with my fist. "Get out!" The heat signature jerked violently, then stayed still. I shouted again. Nothing. Finally, I grabbed a tire iron from the exterior compartment and crouched beside the RV, shaking hard enough I could barely hold the flashlight. "Come out now!" Silence. Then a voice. Not aggressive. Terrified. "Please." Just that word. Please. My skin went cold. The police station was 40 minutes away. No signal at the campground. Rain worsening, kids crying inside. I should have called immediately. Instead, I crawled under there myself. I still don't fully understand why. Maybe because hearing fear changed everything. The space beneath the RV was tighter than I imagined. Mud pressed against my chest as I dragged myself inward with the flashlight clenched in my teeth. Then the beam found the nest. Blankets, plastic tarps, empty soup cans, water bottles, a stolen package of our tortillas, and photographs. Family photographs, not taken by him. Ours. Printed pictures Jen had taped beside the kitchenette. Pictures of the kids at the beach. Murphy wearing a Christmas sweater. One of me asleep at the campsite table. Gone from inside the RV, now hidden underneath it. My stomach lurched. There were other things too. Notes scribbled on napkins. Mentions of our names. Fragments of conversations. Max hates the rain. Mom cries quietly. Dog knows. I backed out so quickly I slammed my head on the undercarriage. The man crawled out after me, slowly. Hands first, then his face. He looked maybe 50, maybe older. Starvation distorts age. His beard was packed with dirt. Rainwater streamed down his hollow cheeks. His clothes looked fused to his body from constant wetness. He kept saying the same thing. "Don't call them. Please don't call them." Murphy barked wildly through the RV door. The kids were screaming inside. The man flinched at every sound like he expected violence. "I wasn't going to hurt anybody," he said rapidly. "I swear to God. I just needed somewhere dry." Dry. That was the word that stayed with me. Because he wasn't dry at all. He smelled like trench water and mildew and infection. His fingers were pale and wrinkled from being constantly wet. One foot was wrapped in duct tape beneath a shredded sock. Jen came outside holding Max behind her. The man saw the kids and immediately started crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, just exhausted crying. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Max buried his face against Jen's side, and suddenly the entire thing became awful in a completely different way. Not a monster. A man. A sick, terrified, invasive man who had been living inches beneath our sleeping children. The ranger finally arrived around dawn. No police at first, just the ranger speaking softly while the man shook uncontrollably under the awning. His name was Leon. He'd been homeless for 3 years. He avoided shelters because he said people stole from him there. He hid under RVs during storms because engines stayed warm for hours after shutting off, and families rarely checked beneath them. "Usually I leave before they notice," he said. Usually. The ranger found signs he'd probably been under ours at least 4 nights. Listening. Waiting until we slept before crawling out. taking food slowly enough that we wouldn't immediately know, opening the storage compartments, standing outside our windows. The photographs disturbed even the ranger. Leon tried explaining that too. "You looked happy," he said quietly. Nobody answered. We left the campground that morning. The kids barely spoke during the drive home. Jen deleted every camping reservation she had planned for the rest of the year. Murphy refused to enter the RV for weeks afterward. But Max changed the most. For months, any unexplained sound made him panic. Hotel rooms, air vents, apartment floors above us. He started asking if people could live inside walls. I told him no, then corrected myself. Not usually. The truth felt dangerous after that trip, because I couldn't stop thinking about how close he'd been. A few inches of fiberglass and plywood between my family and another human being desperate enough to disappear beneath us. Sometimes at night, I still think about the notes. Mom cries quietly. Dog knows. The intimacy of it horrifies me more than the hiding. He knew us. Not deeply. Not personally. But enough. Enough to recognize our voices, our routines, our fears. Enough to become part of our private life without permission. And what unsettles me most now isn't that he hid there. It's that, during those endless nights of rain, while I kept checking the woods with my flashlight, I never once thought to look directly beneath my own feet. The music was what stayed with Maya long after it stopped. It was that specific tinny brand of 1980s classic rock bleeding from the waterproof speakers of a $250,000 Fleetwood Mac RV 3 slots down. Whiskey Creek RV Resort had been suffocatingly alive at 8 p.m. It smelled of lighter fluid, charred Hebrew National hot dogs, and the damp, sweet musk of North Carolina pine. Children on neon green bicycles zipped past their campsite, their laughter cutting through the low hum of dozens of air conditioning units. It was the quintessential American summer, loud, crowded, and safe. Maya, Sam, and Ben had squeezed their battered Honda Civic between two monolithic fifth wheels. They were 5 days into a cross-country road trip, exhausted and smelling of highway salt. "This isn't camping," Ben had grumbled, tossing a bag of chips onto their picnic table. "This is a suburb with wheels." "It's a place to sleep without getting murdered by a bear," Sam replied, already cracking open a beer. By 11 p.m., the atmosphere shifted. The sky didn't just darken, it curdled. A violent, unseasonal storm rolled over the ridge with terrifying speed. There was no prelude of gentle rain, just a sudden, deafening crack of thunder that rattled the fillings in Maya's teeth, followed by a deluge that turned the campground's gravel roads into rushing streams. Then the power died. It didn't just flicker. Every string of fairy lights, every glowing RV window, and the towering neon sign at the campground entrance vanished simultaneously. The hum of the air conditioners cut out, replaced by the sheer, overwhelming roar of the rain against their nylon tent. They huddled inside, shivering as the wind whipped the rainfly. "Hey," Ben whispered around 2 a.m. His eyes were wide in the beam of his phone flashlight. "Do you guys hear that?" Maya strained her ears against the sound of the storm. Underneath the thrum of the rain, there was something else. A wet, dragging sound. And then a voice. "Ben." It was faint, muffled by the downpour, but distinct. It sounded like it was coming from the empty space between their tent and the massive RV next door. "Benny, come out here." "Is that Sarah from the site across from us?" Sam muttered, reaching for the tent zipper. "Don't," Maya said, a sudden, cold spike of dread hitting her stomach. The voice didn't sound right. It had the cadence of a human voice, but the tone was flat, like a recording played back at the wrong speed. Ben frowned, pulling his hoodie tight. "It sounds like my mom, but my mom is in Ohio." He moved before Maya could stop him, unzipping the flap and peering out into the sheets of gray water. He didn't leave the tent. He just stared into the dark for a long time. When he pulled his head back inside, his face was bloodless. "There's no one there," he whispered, "but the light on the RV next to us, it's gone." The morning did not bring the sun. It brought a heavy, suffocating fog that hung 3 feet off the ground, turning the world into a monochromatic blur. Maya woke up because the air felt wrong. It was too quiet. No birds, no crickets, no generators. She unzipped the tent and stepped outside. Her boots sank into soft, overgrown ryegrass. She blinked, rubbing her eyes as expecting to see the gravel loop of Section B. There was nothing. The Fleetwood Mac RV was gone. The fifth wheels were gone. The gravel roads, the concrete patio pads, the communal bathhouse with its blue cinder block walls, all gone. Where a bustling grid of 200 campsites had stood 8 hours ago, there was only an endless, undulating meadow of waist-high weeds, broken up by ancient, gnarled pine trees. "Sam, Ben?" Maya's voice swallowed itself in the fog. They scrambled out of the tent, turning in frantic circles. The Honda Civic was still there, sitting bizarrely in the middle of a pristine, untamed field. But there were no tire tracks behind it, no crushed grass. It looked as if it had been dropped from the sky by a careless hand. "Where is everyone?" Sam's voice cracked. He began to run toward where the main office had been. Maya and Ben followed, their boots soaking in the heavy dew. There was no office. There was no highway. Where the asphalt entrance of Route 4 crested the hill, there was only a dense, impenetrable wall of old-growth forest. "This is a joke. We're at the wrong spot. We walked," Ben stammered, his chest heaving. He was hyperventilating. "We got disoriented in the storm. We walked into the woods." "Ben, our tent is right there," Maya said, her voice terrifyingly calm. The world felt thin, like wet paper. The air tasted stale, like a room that had been locked up for decades. "Look at your phone." Sam pulled out his device. No service. But he opened his gallery. There they were, photos from 8:30 p.m. Ben was holding a charred marshmallow, laughing. In the background, the brilliant, obnoxious LED lights of a neighbor's camper blurred into beautiful bokeh. You could see the license plate of a truck from Texas. The photos were crisp, vibrant, and undeniably real. Maya looked up from the screen to the empty gray meadow. The contrast was a physical blow. Her brain reeled, trying to stitch the two realities together, but they repelled each other like matching magnets. The dread was a heavy, greasy weight in her throat. They hadn't just been left behind. They had been dropped into a pocket of existence where the rest of humanity had never occurred. They spent 4 hours walking in what they thought was a straight line, trying to find the highway. Every direction led them back to the Honda Civic. The car sat in the weeds like a monument to a forgotten civilization. Around noon, though the sky remained a uniform, shadowless gray, Sam found something in the tall grass. It was a rusted piece of sheet metal, half buried in the dirt and choked by ivy. Ben helped him drag it out. It was a sign. The paint was peeling, eaten away by years of harsh winters and humid summers. But the faded green letters were still legible. WISKYCRERVRESOR closed. No trespassing. Below it, barely visible under a layer of dried mud, was a faded newspaper clipping, protected by a cracked plastic sleeve, likely taped there by a local teenager or a cautious hiker years ago. Maya knelt in the damp grass, her fingers trembling as she wiped the grime away. The headlines stared back at her from a date over 10 years in the past. Whiskey Creek closed permanently after fourth tourist vanishes. State authorities have officially shuttered the campground following the unexplained disappearance of the Miller family. Like the previous cases, the Millers' RV and personal belongings were found abandoned on the highway miles away, while their campsite at Whiskey Creek was found completely vacant, showing signs of abandonment that experts state would take years of neglect to produce. Maya dropped the clipping. The silence of the meadow crowded in on them, heavy and expectant. The fog seemed to ripple, drawing closer, casting no shadows, but filling the spaces between the trees. "If the campground closed 10 years ago," Sam whispered, looking at his phone, where the bright, smiling faces of the Texas family in his camera roll still glowed with summer light. "Who did we talk to last night?" From the edge of the dense woods just beyond the gray mist, a sound began to play. It was faint, tinny and distorted like it was bleeding through a bad radio connection. It was a 1980s classic rock song, and underneath the music, a voice called out, flat, hollow, and perfectly mimicking Sam's voice from the night before. "Is that Sarah from the site across from us?" The fog began to roll over the Honda Civic, erasing it from view, inch by inch. At first, we thought it was just another camper walking past our RV. That was the exact sentence my wife whispered to me around midnight when the footsteps first started. We were parked at a small forest campground somewhere outside Libby, buried deep enough in the woods that the GPS had lost signal nearly 20 miles back. It was late October. Cold enough that our breath fogged the RV windows whenever someone spoke too close to the glass. The campground had only 6 sites. We were the only people there. At least, we thought we were. Earlier that evening, everything had felt normal, quiet, peaceful even. The kind of silence you only find in deep wilderness where the trees swallow sound instead of reflecting it. Tall pines surrounded our site in every direction, disappearing into thick bands of white fog that rolled through the forest floor after sunset. Our son Caleb had complained about the lack of internet for maybe an hour before finally giving up and playing cards with us at the tiny kitchen table. My wife Jenna made canned chili on the propane stove while our German Shepherd Rusty paced nervously between the front seats. That was the first thing that felt wrong. Rusty loved camping. Normally, he'd beg to go outside every 10 minutes. He'd bark at squirrels, sniff every tree, patrol the campsite like he owned it. But that evening, he refused to leave the RV. Around dusk, I opened the door to let him out, and he stopped dead halfway down the steps. Not hesitant, terrified. His ears flattened instantly. He stared into the fog beyond our fire pit without moving a muscle. Then he backed into the RV so quickly he slipped on the linoleum floor. I remember laughing nervously. "Probably smells of bear," I said. But Rusty didn't react like that to bears. We'd camped around wildlife before. Moose, coyotes, once even wolves in Idaho. This was different. He kept staring at the door long after I shut it. Around 11:45 p.m., the campground became unnaturally quiet, not normal nighttime quiet, dead quiet. No wind through the pines, no insects, no distant owl calls, just absolute silence pressing against the RV walls. Then came the footsteps. Crunch, step, crunch, step, slowly circling the RV. Jenna looked up from the book she was reading. "Someone's outside." I listened for a few seconds, expecting to hear voices or maybe flashlight beams crossing the windows. Nothing. Just footsteps. At first they sounded human enough, heavy boots walking through damp forest ground. But after about 30 seconds, something about them started bothering me. The rhythm. It wasn't natural. One step landed slightly harder than the other. Not a limp exactly. More like the gait itself was being copied incorrectly. Crunch. Step. Crunch. Step. Too deliberate. Too evenly spaced. Like someone imitating the sound of walking without understanding how humans actually moved. Rusty immediately crawled beneath the dining table. Not barking. Not growling. Just hiding. I stood and moved toward the window beside the sink, pulling the curtain aside slightly. Nothing, only darkness and fog. The motion light mounted outside the RV suddenly clicked on. The entire campsite flooded with pale yellow light. Empty, no person, no movement. The footsteps stopped. For maybe 10 seconds, everything was silent again. Then, crunch. Right beside the RV now, I physically jumped. The sound came from inches outside the wall near the bedroom. Jenna sat upright immediately. "Okay, no. That's not funny anymore." I opened the door a crack and shouted into the forest. "Hello?" No answer. Cold fog drifted through the opening. Rusty started whining the second the door opened. Not aggressive whining, panicked whining. I stepped outside with a flashlight. The campground looked wrong at night. The fog was so thick it erased distance entirely. Trees faded into gray silhouettes after maybe 20 feet. The beam from my flashlight reflected off the mist and made everything look flat and endless. No people, no tents, no sounds. I circled the RV once, nothing. Then I noticed something strange. The ground around our campsite was covered in pine needles and damp leaves, but the footsteps we'd heard hadn't sounded like leaves. Leaves crunch irregularly. These had sounded consistent, compressed, like wet boots on packed gravel, except there was no gravel anywhere around us. I went back inside. The flips started again less than 5 minutes later, this time slower. Crunch, step, around and around the RV for hours. I wish I was exaggerating. Midnight became 1 a.m., 1 became 2. The footsteps never stopped. Sometimes they moved beside the kitchen wall, sometimes near the driver's side window, sometimes directly beneath Caleb's bunk. Always circling, always slow, always wrong. At one point, Jenna whispered, "Maybe we should drive out." But neither of us wanted to go outside long enough to disconnect hookups or check the road in that fog. And honestly, the idea of driving blindly through those woods while something walked outside the RV felt worse. At around 2:15 a.m., the footsteps stopped directly outside our bedroom window. Not beside it, directly outside it. Silence settled over the RV again. Then came the scratching. Soft, almost delicate. Something lightly dragging across the aluminum siding. Jenna grabbed my arm so hard her nails dug into my skin. The scratching moved slowly across the wall beside our bed. Like fingernails testing metal. Then it stopped beneath the window. We didn't breathe. We just listened. And then we heard it. A slow inhale. Not inside the RV. Outside. Right beyond the glass. I reached for the flashlight beside the bed, but Caleb suddenly spoke from the hallway. "Dad?" His voice shook violently. "There's something under the RV." The words hit me like ice water. "What?" I heard breathing. Jenna immediately said, "Don't move." Caleb climbed down from his bunk slowly. His face looked pale even in the dim interior lights. "It sounded underneath me," he whispered, "like right under the floor." The footsteps resumed the second he finished talking. Only now they sounded farther away. Circling again, the motion light outside activated. Off, on. Every time it illuminated the campsite, we saw nothing except drifting fog and black tree trunks. Yet the footsteps continued even while the light showed empty ground. That was the moment fear turned into something worse. Because our brains stopped trying to identify what was outside. Instead, we started trying to understand how it could be outside without being seen at all. Around 3 a.m., I finally looked. Really looked. Not through a cracked curtain, not through reflections. I pressed my face directly against the cold kitchen window and stared into the forest. The fog moved constantly between the trees like slow white smoke. For several seconds, I saw nothing. Then something crossed between two pines. Fast, too fast. A pale shape. Tall. Not white exactly. More colorless, like skin seen underwater. I only caught part of it before it disappeared behind another tree. But I remember one detail clearly. It moved sideways, not turning its body while running. Its entire frame moved sideways between the trees with impossible speed. The motion light clicked on again. Gone. Nothing there. Then came 3 slow knocks against the RV wall. Thunk, thunk, thunk. Caleb started crying quietly. Rusty buried himself against the bathroom door, trembling so hard his tags rattled. The footsteps continued until nearly dawn. Sometimes distant, sometimes inches away. At one point, they stopped on the roof, not climbing, just standing. The RV ceiling creaked softly under weight that sounded impossibly heavy. Then, silence again. Eventually, the darkness outside began turning gray. The footsteps stopped completely. No final sound, no retreat, just gone. Birds started chirping somewhere in the trees. The sudden return of normal forest noise felt almost surreal. None of us moved for several minutes. Finally, Jenna whispered, "I think it's over." I opened the RV door slowly. Cold morning air drifted inside. The fog still lingered low across the campground, but visibility had improved enough to see the surrounding trees. At first, everything looked normal. Then I looked down. Tracks. Deep footprints completely surrounding the RV. Not animal tracks. Not exactly human either. Each print looked stretched somehow, as if the foot had too many joints pressing into the soil at unnatural angles. They circled the RV hundreds of times, overlapping, endless. Caleb pointed upward without speaking. High above the windows, at least 8 feet off the ground, dark handprints covered the RV siding. Long, thin, too large, smeared across the metal like something had been leaning there watching us through the glass all night. Then Jenna saw the dirt beside the fire pit. Words scratched deep into the mud with something sharp. 4 simple words. Stay inside next time. We left everything behind. Chairs, firewood, half our gear. I drove out of that campground faster than I probably should have on those narrow forest roads. And the strangest part, about 10 miles back toward town, Caleb quietly asked me something from the rear seat. "Dad?" I looked at him in the mirror. He stared out the back window into the trees. The footsteps, he swallowed hard. "Did you notice they only sounded like 2 legs?" I didn't answer him, because sometime around 4 a.m., lying awake in that RV, I realized the exact same thing. Whatever circled us that night never once sounded like it used all of its limbs. We noticed the RV floating in the lake just before sunset. At first, I thought it was driftwood. The lake was flat as slate beneath the gray sky, perfectly still except for the faint rings where rain touched the surface. We had been fishing since noon, without catching much besides numb fingers and a headache from the cold. The campground sat high in the mountains somewhere north of the Bitterroots, isolated enough that we'd driven nearly 3 hours without seeing another vehicle. The place barely felt real. No birds, no wind, just endless dark water surrounded by pine-covered slopes disappearing into fog. Ethan lowered his fishing rod slowly. "You seeing that?" I followed his stare toward the center of the lake. Something white sat out there beyond the mist. At first it looked small because of the distance. Then the clouds shifted overhead and I realized it wasn't small at all. It was an RV, an old Class A motorhome. Half submerged, tilted slightly to the right with its rear end buried beneath the water. I remember laughing nervously because my brain couldn't make sense of it. "How the hell does that happen?" Ethan didn't answer. He pulled out the binoculars from his pack and adjusted the focus. The silence around us suddenly felt heavier. After nearly a minute, he handed them to me without speaking. I raised them to my eyes. The RV floated maybe 300 yards from shore. Its faded paint was streaked black with water damage. One side window was cracked. Moss clung to the lower panels beneath the waterline. But the thing that unsettled me immediately was this. It didn't look abandoned. Curtains still hung neatly behind the windows. There was a coffee mug sitting upright on the dashboard, and inside, movement, a shadow crossing from one side to the other. I lowered the binoculars. "You saw that too?" Ethan nodded slowly. Neither of us spoke for a while. The sky darkened early beneath the storm clouds. Across the campground, a few other campers sat beneath awnings or inside trailers. But nobody else seemed interested in the RV sitting in the middle of the lake. That bothered me almost more than the RV itself. It was impossible to miss. Yet nobody looked at it. Nobody pointed. Nobody even acknowledged it existed. We packed up our gear and walked toward the ranger station near the entrance road. The building was small and old, with faded maps hanging inside the windows and a humming fluorescent light over the desk. The ranger behind the counter looked about 70. Thin gray beard, watery eyes. He stared at us before we even spoke, as if he already knew why we'd come. "Is there an accident out on the lake?" Ethan asked. The ranger's expression flattened. "What accident?" "The RV." Silence. The old man slowly set down his coffee cup. Then he said something strange. "You boys stay away from the water after dark." "That thing's sitting in the middle of the lake," Ethan pressed. "Whose is it?" The ranger looked past us toward the windows. "You staying overnight?" "Yeah." "Then keep your curtains closed." "That doesn't answer. It's going to rain tonight," the ranger interrupted quietly. "We still wanna best get back before dark." That was it. No explanation, no concern, nothing. When we stepped outside, Ethan looked furious. "He knows something, or he's just some burned-out old guy. You saw movement in there. I saw shadows." Ethan glanced toward the lake again. "No," he said softly. "You saw it too." Back at our campsite, the temperature dropped hard after sunset. The lake turned black. Fog rolled low across the surface like smoke. We cooked canned chili over the fire while darkness settled between the trees. The campground became eerily still as night deepened. No music, no conversations, no laughter from neighboring sites. Every camper had retreated indoors. Around 9 o'clock, Ethan suddenly froze. "What?" He pointed across the lake. A pale yellow light glowed faintly inside the RV. Not bright, just enough to illuminate one window. I stared at it for several seconds before realizing my hands were trembling. "There's someone in there." The light vanished. A few moments later, knock, soft, distant, barely audible across the water. Knock, knock, 3 slow impacts echoing over the lake. Ethan stood immediately. "Did you hear that?" I nodded. The sound came again, not metallic, not random, deliberate, like knuckles against wood. We grabbed the binoculars. The RV looked different now, closer somehow. Not physically close, but larger, clearer. The window curtains had shifted open slightly, and behind the glass stood a figure, tall, motionless, watching the shoreline. I nearly dropped the binoculars. Ethan snatched them back and stared. "Oh my God." The figure disappeared. A second later, every light inside the RV went dark. The knocking stopped. That night, neither of us slept much. Rain tapped against the roof of our tent while the lake remained invisible beyond the trees. Sometime after midnight, I woke to Ethan sitting outside in a folding chair, staring toward the water. "You need sleep," I whispered. He didn't turn around. What if someone's trapped in there? Nobody could survive inside that thing. But what if they did? I almost argued further before realizing something else. The knocking had returned. Faint, slow, coming from somewhere far across the lake. Knock, knock, knock. By morning, the RV had moved. Not dramatically, but definitely. It now floated farther south near the rocky edge of the lake, despite no visible current and almost no wind during the night. Ethan noticed immediately. You see that? Probably drift. It moved 50 yards. We asked around the campground that morning. Every response felt wrong. A woman making coffee claimed she hadn't noticed any RV. A fisherman shrugged and said the lake was dangerous after dark. One older couple simply walked away when Ethan mentioned it. Nobody would talk about it directly. That afternoon, Ethan became obsessed. He kept watching the RV through binoculars for hours at a time. Sometimes he swore he saw movement behind the curtains. Other times, he claimed someone was standing near the back window. At one point, he grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "There's a kid in there." "What?" "I saw a little girl." "You're imagining things." "No, I'm not." His voice sounded shaky now, panicked, like he genuinely believed it. The second night, the weather worsened. Heavy fog covered the lake entirely. The RV became little more than a dim silhouette in the distance. Then, around 9:23 p.m. exactly, every light inside it turned on simultaneously, yellow squares glowing through the mist. The knocking started again, louder this time, more urgent. Knock, 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 pause, knock, knock. Ethan stood abruptly. "We're going out there." "No, we need to check." "In the middle of the night?" "What if somebody's alive? That thing has been sitting there for years." "You don't know that." He was already pulling the small aluminum boat toward shore. I should have refused. I should have stayed behind. Instead, I followed him, because part of me needed answers too. The lake water was black beneath the fog. Every paddle stroke sounded unnaturally loud. The campground lights disappeared quickly behind us until the shore became nothing but faint shadows behind drifting mist. Halfway across, the fog thickened so badly I could barely see Ethan sitting at the bow. Then the knocking changed. It came from nearby now, directly ahead. Knock, 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 knock. The RV emerged suddenly from the fog only 20 feet away. I nearly shouted. Up close, it looked massive, ancient. Water lapped against its submerged side with hollow, sloshing sounds. The windows were dark again, but I could feel something watching us from inside. Ethan tied the boat to the rear ladder. "Tell me this isn't insane," I whispered. He didn't answer. The RV door hung slightly open. We climbed aboard. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not rot, not lake water, warm dust, like entering a house closed up for years. And somehow, The interior was completely dry. No water damage, no mold, nothing. The carpet beneath my boots felt clean. I stared around in disbelief. Family photographs still hung on the walls. A smiling couple beside the lake, 2 children holding fish, Christmas decorations. Normal life frozen in time. Half-eaten food sat on the small dining table. A sandwich hardened with age beside a bowl of soup turned black. The television near the front buzzed softly with white static. Every clock inside the RV displayed the same time. 9:23 p.m. Microwave clock. Wall clock. Small digital alarm clock near the couch. All stopped, all identical. Ethan whispered, "Jesus." Then we heard movement deeper inside. A wet sound, like footsteps. Slow, dragging. We both turned toward the hallway leading to the back bedroom. Darkness waited there. I felt cold sweat run down my spine. "Hello?" Ethan called. No answer. He moved forward carefully. I grabbed his arm. "Don't." Then we both saw them. Wet footprints. Fresh, human footprints leading down the hallway. Water still glistened on the carpet. One after another. Bare feet. Heading toward the bedroom. Ethan pulled free from my grip. "There is somebody here." He started down the hallway. The television static suddenly grew louder behind us. The lights flickered once, twice, then stabilized. I remember noticing one detail in the photographs hanging beside the hallway. In every single picture, the family stood beside this exact lake. And in every photograph, the RV floated somewhere in the background. Far out on the water, my stomach dropped. Ethan, he reached the bedroom door. It stood partially open, darkness inside. The wet footprints disappeared through the gap. Then the door moved slowly, not slammed, not sudden, just a gradual creaking motion. Closing itself, Ethan shoved it open immediately, and the knocking began beneath our feet. Violent now, directly under the floor. Bang! 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 The entire RV trembled. Something underneath us wanted in or wanted out. Ethan stared downward in horror. Then came another sound from inside the bedroom, a wet, inhaling breath. Close. Too close. I backed away instantly. Ethan? He didn't move. His face had gone pale. The knocking beneath the floor intensified until the cabinets rattled. The television erupted into screaming static. And somewhere inside the bedroom, something moved. Fast. I only saw part of it, a pale shape crossing the darkness. Too tall to fit naturally inside the room. Ethan whispered my name once, not loudly, not afraid, more like realization. Then the bedroom door slammed shut. The RV lights died instantly. Darkness swallowed everything. I heard Ethan shouting from the other side of the door, then pounding, then screaming, then nothing. The knocking beneath the floor stopped completely. Absolute silence. I don't remember getting back to the boat. I barely remember reaching shore. I only remember rowing blindly through fog while something moved in the water beside me the entire way back. Not swimming, keeping pace. When I stumbled onto shore near dawn, the campground was already awake. People stood outside silently watching the lake. Nobody asked where Ethan was. Nobody asked what happened. The old ranger only stared at me for a long time before speaking quietly. "Did you go inside?" I couldn't answer. He nodded slowly anyway. Then he said the strangest thing I've ever heard. "It only takes one." By sunrise, the RV had moved again, farther from shore now, floating quietly beneath the gray sky, waiting in the middle of the lake. And sometimes, just before dark, if the fog rolls in thick enough, you can see 2 figures standing behind the windows. I've learned something about the road that most weekend campers never talk about. The quietest nights are the ones that decide who you really are. They peel back the layers you put on for the world, the confidence, the plans, the sense that you understand the land beneath your feet, and they show you what's been waiting underneath. That realization hit me harder than any storm, any bear encounter, any mechanical breakdown. Because once you see what the silence actually carries, there's no pretending it's just the wind anymore. My name is Evan, I'm 34, and I've been living out of my Volkswagen for a little over 3 years now. I wasn't running from anything when I started, at least that's what I kept telling myself. I called it a road experiment, a way to reset to see America in a more honest way, to feel closer to landscapes than cramped apartments and soulless offices would ever allow. But the more nights I spent parked beneath strange forests or along quiet desert pullouts, the more I realized something old inside me had been waiting for that isolation. Something that twisted whenever the dark pressed close. One thing about Volkswagen camping, people imagine campfires, sunsets, and the purity of minimalism. Nobody talks about the other side of solitude, the side where your headlights catch shapes in places where shapes shouldn't be, or where someone knocks on your van door long after you know every other camper is asleep. And nobody prepares you for the moment you feel watched, even though every window is shut and every curtain is drawn. The story I'm about to share isn't from a forum or some urban legend thread. It's from a viewer who watches my channel religiously. Someone who wanted me to tell their truth because they couldn't get through telling it themselves. This is how they described it to me in a shaking voice message that kept cutting in and out. I wasn't alone. I know I wasn't alone. And it wasn't a person, Evan, not something human. I didn't publish that part of their message, but it's been sitting with me ever since. And before I tell you what happened to them, you should know why I even believed them. A few weeks before that message came in, I camped in a place called Black Ridge Hollow, a little-known section of forest in southern Utah. I'd heard about it from a ranger who said it was underrated, which is usually code for you'll be the only one there. Perfect for someone like me. I love the stretches where I'm alone enough to hear my own thoughts echo. But from the moment I turned off the highway and onto that dirt service road, something felt wrong. Not dangerous, just off balance, like stepping down a staircase that didn't have as many steps as you expected. The road was lined with dark pines, but their branches looked unnaturally heavy, drooping low, almost touching the roof of my van as I drove underneath them. They felt weighted, like they were listening, watching. The needles didn't rustle like normal pines either. Instead, every gust made them sway with a dry, papery sound, like pages flipping in a book with no words. I found a clearing near the ridge, wide enough for my Volkswagen, and a small fire ring someone had left behind. It should have felt comforting, familiar, like any other campsite I'd pulled over the last 3 years. But the silence was strange. Thick, almost expectant. Not a single insect. Not one distant bird. I stepped out, stretched my legs, and told myself it was just altitude messing with the wildlife patterns. But the back of my neck prickled the whole time I was setting up. Quiet unease. That's how every real horror starts. Not with a scream or a threat, but with a small, logical discomfort your mind tries to repackage into something harmless. I cooked dinner, cleaned up, and settled into the van with a book. I wasn't tired, but I didn't feel like wandering around either. Around midnight, I turned off my lantern and lay facing the sliding door, watching the faint silver glow of moonlight through the curtains. That's when I heard it, a soft, steady rhythm tapping against the side of my van. Not loud, not aggressive, just deliberate, like someone dragging their fingernails lightly along the metal. Scratch, scratch, scratch. At first I froze, my breath caught somewhere between my chest and throat. I told myself it was a branch, maybe swaying in the wind, but the air outside had gone still an hour earlier. And the sound was too measured, too intentional. I held my breath, listening. Scratch, pause. Scratch, pause. I reached slowly for the small flashlight near my pillow. My heart was moving too fast to hide the tremor in my hands. I knew better than to fling open the door without thinking. I'd been warned about that by enough seasoned campers. So I eased forward, careful not to make the van rock, and peered through the tiny gap between the curtain and the window frame. Nothing. Just darkness layered on darkness, the silhouettes of trees standing motionless. And then a faint shape shifted near the rear of the van, too smooth for foliage, too tall to be an animal I recognized. It moved without sound, like its feet didn't disturb the soil at all. That was when the tapping stopped. I lowered myself back into bed, every muscle tense telling myself over and over that curiosity kills more campers than fear ever will. I didn't sleep. Not really. I just lay there for hours while the silence pressed against the van like a second skin. By sunrise, the clearing finally felt breathable again. I stepped outside with a stiffness I hadn't felt in months. On the back panel of the van, just near the taillight, was a long smear of something dark, thin, oily. Not sap. I know what sap looks like. And this wasn't it. I wiped it off with a cloth, convinced myself it was just residue from a branch. Then I packed up and headed out. I didn't talk about that night on my channel because I didn't want to start sounding like one of those creators who exaggerate everything for views. I chalked it up to exhaustion, altitude, nerves, whatever excuse made sense. But less than 10 days later, that viewer sent me their story, and the location tag on their message stunned me. Black Ridge Hollow. Same forest, same week. They weren't trying to scare me. They didn't even know I'd been there. And yet, the moment I heard the quiver in their voice when they described the tapping at their van window, I knew they had lived through something no campfire story prepares you for. What they survived makes my night feel tame in comparison. Their story begins the same way. Empty clearing, 2 quiet woods, no wildlife, no wind. But unlike me, they didn't leave in the morning. They stayed a second night, and that second night is where everything changed for them. Before I tell you what happened, you need to understand the kind of person they were. They told me their name was Lucas, 29, from Tennessee, traveling cross-country in the same beat-up Volkswagen they'd restored with their brother. They were the kind of camper who didn't scare easily. They dealt with bears, weird strangers at gas stations, even a flash flood that almost drowned their van in Arizona. But they said nothing compared to what they saw when the tapping started again. And this time, it wasn't alone. Lucas told me the second night in Black Ridge Hollow felt strangely warmer than the first, even though the temperature on their dashboard showed it had dropped nearly 10 degrees. Inside the van, they could feel heat rising from the floorboards, as if something beneath the earth had started breathing. They described it as a thick warmth, heavy enough to fog the windows and make the air feel humid, almost swamp-like. They tried cracking a window for ventilation, but that only made things worse. The moment they slid it open, the smell drifted in. Wet dirt, cold stone, and something faintly metallic like a tool left out in the rain. It startled them because they knew that smell. They'd smelled it once while hiking deep in the Smoky Mountains. A decaying elk half buried in leaves, its ribs still wet, its eyes long gone. That same metallic rot now seeped through the forest air. That was the moment quiet unease turned into tension. Lucas shut the window immediately, but the smell didn't go away. It grew thicker, settling in the van like a presence. They said it was so strong they tasted it. They tried to distract themselves, watched videos on their phone, anything to drown out the growing pressure in their chest. But then, sometime close to 1 a.m., the tapping began. Not on one side of the van, on all sides, light, rhythmic, a fingertip on metal, a knuckle against glass, a long nail dragging. Tap on the rear window, tap on the passenger side, tap near the sliding door, tap above their head. Lucas froze, heart hammering, breath shallow. They whispered to themselves, "It's branches, it has to be the wind." But there was no wind. The pine needles weren't moving. The trees were still. The forest held its breath. The tapping grew more coordinated, like something circling the van slowly, studying it, testing it. Suspicion took root. I could picture Lucas sitting there, back pressed against the cushions, phone screen lighting their face. They told me the sound reminded them of a child walking around a car with a curiosity too innocent to be threatening, except there was nothing innocent in the pacing. Whoever or whatever was out there wasn't wandering, it was surveying. And then, as suddenly as it started, the tapping stopped. Lucas waited, listening, the silence so sharp like a blade against their skin. Then came the first whisper. Not a voice, not anything human. A low, Breathy sound pressed right against the driver's side window, so faint Lucas wasn't sure they heard it correctly. Just one long exhale, like someone testing the glass with their breath. They said it was the certainty that killed them, the eerie, absolute certainty that something was leaning right up against the window. Dread settles differently than fear. Fear spikes. Dread sinks. Lucas didn't move. Their eyes watered from trying not to blink. Their breathing slowed to tiny, trembling inhales. Then came a second whisper on the opposite side of the van. Softer, wetter, dragging across the glass. Lucas told me they nearly screamed. They clamped a hand over their mouth, heart pounding so loudly they thought the thing outside must be able to hear it. They scrambled backward, pulling the curtains tighter even though there were no gaps. Their instincts fought their logic. Every part of them wanted to peek, just to know, but they couldn't. They knew that whatever was out there wasn't meant to be seen by someone like them. Then the van shifted, not a gentle rock from movement inside, not the groan of settling suspension. Something pushed the van from the outside, a heavy shove, just enough to make the frame creak, enough to jolt Lucas sideways, enough to make the cookware rattling in the drawers clatter against each other. Panic surged. Hot. Electric. Lucas grabbed their keys on instinct, but when they pressed the fob, the van didn't chirp. No click, no lights, no response. They tried again. Nothing. The battery wasn't dead. The dashboard had been on minutes earlier, yet somehow the electrical systems refused to acknowledge them. The van rocked again, and another whisper fluttered across the window, too close, too deliberate. Lucas didn't cry, didn't scream. They told me something strange happened instead. Their fear shifted into a cold, focused stillness. The same feeling they'd had once when their brakes failed on a steep dirt trail. They weren't shaking anymore. They weren't hyperventilating. They were planning. They crawled silently toward the driver's seat, staying low, trying not to disturb the van's balance. Every second felt stretched, suspended. They gripped the steering wheel and tried the ignition. Click. Silence. Click. Silence. Then, the faintest scrape against the windshield, right in front of their face. Lucas kept their head down, forehead pressed to their knees, knuckles white on the wheel. Tears finally spilled, but they made no sound, and then the van stopped moving. No more whispers, no more tapping, just silence, thick, absolute, crushing. Lucas waited 5 minutes, 10, 15. They lost track of time. They said the forest felt like it was holding them hostage. The air was too still, the night too dense, the silence too alert. Finally, something inside them snapped. Escape. They turned the key one more time, and the engine roared to life so violently it startled even them. They slammed the headlights on, and that was the first mistake. The clearing exploded into view, blinding white beams cutting through the dark, and Lucas saw something they will never unsee. Shapes, tall, thin, dozens of them. They stood just beyond the reach of the headlights, arranged in a ring around the clearing, unmoving like dark pillars carved from the night itself. Not trees. Trees don't stand that close together. Trees don't have shoulders. Trees don't lean forward when light touches them. Lucas said the figures didn't scatter, didn't flinch. They simply tilted all at once, as if their heads were turning toward the van. A synchronized acknowledgement. Lucas threw the van into drive and floored the accelerator. The tires skidded in the dirt, spraying gravel, engine screaming. The figures didn't chase, not visibly. But the forest felt like it leaned inward as the van shot toward the service road. Branches clawed at the sides, the smell grew stronger. The night stretched unnaturally long, like the road refused to end. Lucas didn't look in the mirrors, didn't check GPS, didn't breathe until the forest finally thinned and the sky opened above them. They drove until dawn. When they stopped at a gas station in a nearby town, they stepped out and saw what the figures had left behind. 4 long streaks of dark, oily residue on the van's rear panel. Same as mine, but these streaks were wider. And something about the pattern looked intentional, almost like the start of a symbol that hadn't been finished. Lucas said the residue had a smell, faint, metallic, almost like blood diluted in water. Reflection always comes after escape. But escape changes you. It rewrites your instincts. For Lucas, the aftermath wasn't relief. It was the haunting realization that the figures weren't trying to break into the van. They were trying to get Lucas to come out. When Lucas told me that last part, that realization about why those figures circled the van, something inside me tightened. Fear doesn't always come in the moment of danger. Sometimes it hits afterward, when the mind finally catches up to what the body survived. Lucas said the moment they understood the truth, they pulled over on the shoulder of that empty Utah highway and vomited, hands shaking so violently they could barely stay upright. They said it wasn't terror, exactly. It was the deep, instinctive horror of knowing something old, something deliberate, had tried to lure them out into the dark. Not attack them, not break in, just draw them out. And that meant it knew how we think. It knew how people react when they're scared. It knew how curiosity and panic and confusion work. It knew that if it shook the van hard enough or whispered long enough or tapped just right, Lucas might open the door. That's what haunted them most. They told me they drove through 3 states after that, too afraid to stop at any campground that had trees, shadows, or silence. They slept at brightly lit truck stops, parking lots, anywhere with noise and people. But even there, they felt watched. They kept checking mirrors, kept scanning rooftops, kept expecting to see those shapes again. And the worst part? The stain on the back of the van wouldn't wash off. They tried soap, hot water, steel wool. Nothing removed it completely. It always left a faint shadow, like a fingerprint burned into the paint. I listened to their voice message over and over, trying to hear what they weren't saying, trying to understand why they were reaching out to me. Because fear alone doesn't make someone call a stranger. There was something else layered beneath their words. Exhaustion, maybe, or a kind of quiet desperation. And then I found out what it really was. One morning, about a week after they first contacted me, I got another message, but this one wasn't sent from a place of panic. The voice was calm, too calm. Evan, I think it's following me. Not a question, not a fear, a statement. They said they were in Montana now, trying to outrun the thing. They'd been driving for hours, crossing state lines with the kind of frantic urgency you can't fake. They had stopped at a remote rest area just long enough to refill water. When they came back, the rear panel of the van had fresh streaks on it, new ones, wet, dripping. They told me the realization hit them so hard they nearly passed out, because they hadn't been near any forests. They hadn't parked near trees. They hadn't even stopped long enough for anything to come near the van. Yet the residue was there. I remember sitting in my own Volkswagen that day, engine off, phone in my hand, staring at the screen as their voice trembled through the speaker. Something cold trickled through me. I glanced at the windows, at the mirrors, at the surrounding forest. My breath grew shallow. Because if Lucas was right, if the thing had followed them across 3 states, if it could move without being seen, if it knew how to approach without making a sound, then maybe it wasn't connected to Black Ridge Hollow at all. Maybe Black Ridge Hollow was just where Lucas and I first noticed it. Suspicion sharpened into dread. That night, I parked in an RV area outside of Boise. A big, busy one with streetlights and kids on bicycles and retired couples grilling outside their rigs. Safe. Normal. The kind of place where strange things don't happen because too many eyes keep the shadows honest. I slept with the curtains cracked open, letting the orange glow from the nearest lamp spill across the interior. I kept reminding myself that whatever happened to Lucas was an outlier, something rare, something peculiar to that forest. Nothing followed me out of Black Ridge Hollow. Nothing had touched my van since. But just after 2 a.m., I woke up gasping because someone was walking around my van. I heard the footsteps before I opened my eyes, slow, deliberate steps crunching the gravel, too heavy to be a kid, too soft to be an adult wearing boots. A steady rhythm, a pacing rhythm. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Through the crack in my curtains, I saw the glow of the street lamp stretching across the gravel, but I didn't see a shadow, not a single one. I sat frozen, my body locked in that place between dreams and reality where instincts scream louder than logic. The steps circled twice, 3 times. Then they stopped on the passenger side, right outside the window near my head. I waited for a tap, a whisper, a breath, but instead something brushed the van. Not a hand, not a palm. Fabric, like someone dragging a sleeve across the metal as they leaned in, slowly, intimately, as though testing how much they could get away with before I reacted. My lungs seized. Every instinct in me screamed to look, to sit up, to find out who or what was there. But I held still. Through the crack in the curtain, I saw a movement. Not a person. A shape. Tall. Wrong. When it passed the lamp, the light didn't hit it the way it should have. It didn't cast the right kind of shadow. For a moment I thought maybe I was still half asleep, misinterpreting what I saw. Then the shape stopped again, inches from the van. I felt pressure on the glass, faint, like someone pressing a single fingertip against it. And right then, for the first time in my life, something inside me said, "Don't look. Don't you dare." That was the voice that saved me. I stayed perfectly still until the pressure left the window, until the shape drifted back into the shadows, until the footsteps faded, and then silence. But it wasn't the safety of silence. It was the same suffocating stillness from Black Ridge Hollow. I didn't sleep again that night. When the sun rose, I stepped out of the van to inspect it, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold the handle. On the passenger side door, just beneath the window, was another mark, a faint smear, thin, oily. I touched it with my fingertip. It was cold, too cold for the morning air. And that was when the truth hit me. The truth I didn't want to acknowledge until that moment. Lucas wasn't running from something that lived in the forest. He was running from something that lived in the dark, something that didn't need trees or silence or a clearing, something that traveled, something that learned. The forest didn't create it. The forest just let us notice it. I kept thinking about Lucas, where they could be now, whether they were still moving, still breathing, still alive. Every hour that passed, I waited for another message from them, but none came. Not that day, not the next, not the week after. The last thing they told me, the last thing I ever heard from them, came in a short voice message, barely 5 seconds long, just breathing at first, shaky, panicked, then a whisper, "It's at the door." I listened to that 5-second message more times than I want to admit. Every time I pressed play, I prayed I'd misheard it. Prayed that the last word wasn't door. Prayed that maybe Lucas meant something else. A metaphor, a panicked exaggeration, anything that didn't mean what I knew it meant. But the fear in their voice was too real, too raw, too final. And the worst part? There was another sound layered underneath that whisper. A soft vibration, almost like something dragging across metal or something breathing close enough to fog the microphone. After that message, everything shifted for me. I stopped treating the experience in Black Ridge Hollow as an outlier. I stopped telling myself the tapping and the shape outside my van were coincidences or tricks of the dark. I stopped pretending I wasn't part of whatever had taken root in Lucas's life. Because if this thing had followed them, if it had marked their van, if it had learned their routines, then it had learned mine too. Fear turned into vigilance, vigilance into paranoia, and paranoia into a quiet, steady dread that followed me city to city, state to state. I slept with all the curtains shut tight. I avoided parking near forests. I checked the exterior of the van every morning before the sun even broke the horizon. And every few days, no matter where I was, Idaho, Wyoming, Nevada, there'd be a new smear. A faint streak of that same cold residue, always in a different place, always small, always subtle, like a calling card, like a reminder. And the truth that haunted me, the thing that burrowed deeper with every mark I found, was that the residue never appeared where someone's hand would naturally rest. It was always too high, or too low, or too far back, or in a place where no human could comfortably reach without contorting. As if the thing didn't understand what human arms were supposed to look like, as if it was mimicking touch rather than performing it. I tried going back through every message Lucas had sent me, listening for clues, patterns, anything that would explain what was happening. But all I heard was their breathing, their fear, and that last whisper. It's at the door. After 2 weeks without hearing from them, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know what happened. Needed to know whether they managed to get away, whether the thing finally caught up to them, whether they were alive or just gone. So I drove toward Montana. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't film. I didn't post. I spent the entire drive gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. Every shadow on the shoulder made me flinch. Every time a semi passed, my heart jumped. I arrived near the area where their last GPS ping had come from. A small, nameless rest stop off a long stretch of highway that cut through hills of pale, sun-bleached grass. The kind of place no one stops unless they're exhausted or desperate. There were no cars when I pulled in. No RVs, no Volkswagen van. Just a picnic table, a bathroom building that looked abandoned, and a single street lamp flickering like it was trying to die. I parked, stepped out. The wind swept dust across my shoes. Somewhere in the tall grass, a cricket chirped once and then went silent. I checked every corner of the lot. I searched for tire tracks, footprints, anything that might tell me Lucas had been here. But the ground was hard, too dry to preserve anything. And then, just as I started to lose hope, I noticed something near the edge of the pavement. A smear. Thin, dark, oily, too familiar. My stomach twisted. I crouched down, touched it with 2 fingers. Cold, even under the sun. Impossible, unnatural cold. It was the same residue from the van, the same pattern, the same chilling temperature. But this mark wasn't on a vehicle. It was on the ground. A long streak, like something had dragged itself or something else across the pavement toward the tall grass. I followed the smear with slow, unsteady steps. It curved toward the ditch, then disappeared into the earth. I knelt down, heart pounding so hard it hurt, peering into the grass. That's when I saw the shape. Half hidden, crumpled. Still, for one breath, I thought it was Lucas. I thought the thing had gotten them and left them there like an abandoned toy. But when I pushed the grass aside with shaking hands, what I saw made my legs give out. It wasn't a body. It was a Volkswagen bumper, ripped clean off, paint peeled in long, unnatural arcs, metal bent in ways no tool could bend, as if something had folded it like cloth, and smeared across the curve of the bumper were 4 long streaks of that same residue. 4, like fingers. But what hit me the hardest wasn't the damage, it was the message. Carved into the metal, deep, jagged lines gouged with something impossibly sharp, was a single word. Mine. I stumbled backward so fast I nearly fell. My breath came in violent bursts. The world felt wrong, tilted, too bright, too silent. Because that word meant only one thing. It wasn't hunting Lucas anymore. It had claimed them, and now it was moving on. Reflection has a weight to it, a heaviness that settles behind your ribs and stays there, cold and constant. Standing in that empty rest stop, staring at that twisted metal, I realized something I'd been trying not to face. The thing hadn't chosen Lucas. It had chosen the van. Volkswagens. Small, compact, stories woven into American road culture. And both of us had something else in common. We slept close to the ground. Easy for something to reach. Easy for something to press a hand against the panel. Easy for something to whisper through the walls. When I finally pulled myself together enough to walk back to my own van, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely fit the key into the lock. The sky darkened behind me. A storm was coming, wind sweeping across the plains, grass bending in long waves. But the closer I got to my van, the quieter everything became. No wind. No insects. No distant trucks, just silence, that same deep, unnatural silence from Black Ridge Hollow. I stopped 10 feet away. My breath caught. On the driver's side door, right beneath the window, were 4 fresh streaks, still dripping, still cold, still claiming. And in that moment, that razor-thin second between flight and paralysis, something shifted inside me. Fear didn't vanish, but something deeper rose up underneath it. Resolve. Because whatever this thing was, wherever it came from, whatever rules it followed, it wanted me alive. It wanted me afraid. It wanted me moving, running, giving it chances to draw me out again and again. But I wasn't Lucas, and I wasn't going to be claimed. I stepped toward the door, my voice steady, my heartbeat loud but controlled. When I touched the handle, the metal was freezing. I whispered into the silence, not out of bravery, but out of refusal. You don't get to choose me. The wind returned in a single burst. The insects started chirping again, the world breathed, and just like that, the smear stopped dripping. It didn't vanish, didn't fade, but it stopped growing, like the thing had heard me, like it understood. I got into the van, locked the doors, started the engine. But before I pulled away, I looked into the mirror, half expecting to see a shape standing behind me. There was nothing, just the empty rest stop, just the fading light, just the long road stretching out in both directions. But as I drove away, I knew something with absolute certainty. Some roads don't take you anywhere. Some roads bring something back with you. And some roads, the darkest ones, don't let go even when you think you've escaped. I don't know where Lucas is. I don't know if they're alive. I don't know if the thing found someone else, or if it's still trailing behind me in the places the mirrors can't reach. But I do know this. If you hear tapping on your Volkswagen in the middle of the night, if you smell wet earth and cold metal, if the forest goes silent, if something brushes your window, don't open the door. Don't check the mirrors. Don't look into the dark. Because some viewers send stories, and some viewers disappear before they can tell you the ending. And if you're hearing this now, if you're listening in the dark the way Lucas listened, don't watch alone. Some stories watch back. I've learned that the silence of the wilderness is not really silent at all. It's layered with whispers most people never notice until they've been out there long enough, cut off from everything familiar. My name's Daniel Hayes. I'm 39 years old, and I've been living on and off in my RV for the better part of 5 years. I started boondocking because I thought it would give me freedom, the kind I couldn't find in cities or crowded campgrounds. And it did at first. But when you push yourself farther and farther from the comfort of others, you start to realize the wilderness has its own rules, rules that don't care about you, and sometimes rules that want you to forget you ever existed. I drove out of Missoula, Montana last September just before the weather started to turn. My plan was simple: head south through the Bitterroot Valley, turn off onto one of those Forest Service roads I'd been eyeing on the map, and disappear for a week. No hookups, no cell signal, no neighbors. Just me, my RV, and the vast silence of the backcountry. I told myself it was about testing my self-reliance. The truth was, I was running from noise, work stress, failed relationships, the steady thrum of a world that felt like it was closing in on me. By the time I found the turnout I wanted, dusk was already brushing the tops of the trees with orange light. The road narrowed to gravel, climbing slowly, winding into hills so steep my old rig strained on every switchback. Dust followed me, hanging thick in the fading light, and the deeper I went, the more I realized how easy it would be to vanish out there. No one knew I was on that road, not really. Not even I knew where it ended. At mile 12, the road widened into a flat shelf carved into the mountainside, just big enough to back in and level my RV. From the edge, I could see nothing but a sea of pines folding into darker and darker shades as the sun dropped. The only sound was the soft tick of my engine cooling, and somewhere far below, water rushing through a canyon I couldn't see. It felt perfect. Isolated, quiet, the kind of quiet I thought I needed. But silence out there doesn't stay quiet for long. The first night I sat outside with a small fire, watching sparks lift into the black. My breath hung in the cold air. The moon was just a sliver, and without it, the darkness felt heavier than anything I'd known. The stars spilled across the sky, dizzying in their clarity. But then, just as I let myself relax into it, I heard something, a knock. It came from the woods. Not the snap of a branch or the shuffle of an animal. No, this was deliberate, a hollow rap like knuckles against wood, then silence. I froze, every hair on my body rising. My fire crackled too loud. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a branch falling, echoing oddly. I went inside the RV and locked the door, even though I knew locks meant nothing out there. I didn't sleep well. By morning, I was already rationalizing. Probably a woodpecker, I told myself, or my mind playing tricks in the dark. The kind of fear city people carry into the wilderness until they adapt. I busied myself with chores, checking my water, rationing food, hiking down to the stream with my filter. The day was clear, the air sharp with pine, and for a while I felt steady again. But that night, the knocks came back. 3 of them. Same rhythm. Close. Too close. I killed the lantern and sat in the dark, listening so hard my ears rang. Nothing else. Just those knocks, as if someone or something was reminding me I wasn't alone. I stayed put the next day, waiting, watching. The forest was still, but stillness out there isn't empty. It presses on you, fills your chest, makes every breath feel like it belongs to something else. Around noon, I found footprints in the soft dirt near the stream. Bare feet. Human. But the stride was strange, too long for a normal man, almost like someone had stretched themselves unnaturally. That was when unease turned into tension I couldn't shake. I started second-guessing everything. The decision to come out here alone, the way I hadn't told anyone my exact spot, the fact that my RV was just a thin metal shell sitting in a wilderness that had no obligation to keep me safe. I tried moving my rig a half-mile farther up the road the following evening, hoping to shake the feeling. The road narrowed dangerously, branches scraping along the sides as if the forest was trying to close in and keep me there. Eventually, I found another pullout, tighter but sheltered under towering spruce. I set up camp again, forced myself to make dinner, tried to push down the dread that had started crawling under my skin. That night, the knocks didn't come. But the sound of breathing did. At first, I thought it was my own breath echoing weirdly inside the RV, but it wasn't in sync with mine. It was deeper, slower, outside my window. When I pulled the curtain just an inch, I didn't see anything, but I smelled it. Damp earth, mold, the sharpness of river mud, the kind of smell that doesn't belong 30 feet up a mountainside. I shut the curtain and pressed my back to the wall. I told myself over and over, it's a bear. Just a curious bear. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. Bears don't knock in rhythm. Bears don't walk barefoot. Bears don't breathe like they're trying to sink themselves to you. When morning came, I was hollow-eyed, exhausted, and in the dirt just outside my RV door were prints again. Bare feet, this time circling the vehicle. Something was watching me out there, something that wanted me to know it. I thought about leaving that morning, thought about firing up the engine and barreling down the switchbacks until I hit pavement again. But part of me, some stubborn, prideful part, refused. I had come out here to prove I could handle the solitude, the dangers, the unpredictability. I told myself leaving would mean I'd failed, that I'd let fear control me. So I stayed. That's the thing about boondocking in the wilderness. Your biggest threat isn't the wildlife or the weather or even the terrain. It's your own mind. How long can you hold it together when every shadow feels like it's leaning toward you, when silence itself feels like it's listening? I wanted to believe I was tougher than the fear, that I could outlast whatever was pacing out there in the night. But fear has a way of peeling layers off you, and once it gets under your skin, it doesn't let go easy. The 4th night, I tried something different. I built my fire bigger, stacking logs so high the flames licked above my head. I thought maybe light and heat would keep whatever it was away, the way fire had always been man's oldest shield. I sat in my camp chair, staring into the blaze until my eyes burned. But when the night deepened, when the stars cut through the black like glass shards, the knocks returned. Only this time they weren't in front of me, they were behind me. I spun so fast the chair toppled, my chest thundering. Out there, just beyond the glow, came the sound of hollow knuckles against wood. 3 knocks, then silence. I couldn't see anything past the trees, only darkness. The forest seemed to lean in, swallowing the firelight whole. My first instinct was to shout, to tell whatever it was that I wasn't afraid. But the words caught in my throat. If I shouted, something might answer, and I wasn't sure I could live with that. I dragged my chair back inside the RV and locked the door. I sat on the bed, gripping the handle of my hatchet until my fingers ached. For hours, I waited, my body tight, listening. The knocks didn't come again, but that steady breathing did, closer than ever, right outside my window. At one point, I swear I heard it whisper. Not words I could understand, just the rasp of air through vocal cords, like someone trying to remember how to speak. When dawn came, I stepped outside, ready to see more prints. But the ground was clear, too clear, as though someone or something had swept it clean while I slept. Even the prints from the day before were gone. That was when the suspicion set in heavy. Maybe this wasn't some wild hermit or animal. Maybe it was the land itself. Maybe the forest had grown tired of me. I thought of how old those mountains were, older than memory, older than my own species. What was a man in an RV compared to that kind of age? Nothing more than a trespasser. I considered moving again, but the road ahead narrowed so steeply that I'd risk getting stuck. Backing down those switchbacks wasn't much better. I was trapped, pinned between pride and terrain, so I stayed. On the fifth night, the forest grew bold. It started with the knocks, echoing in a slow, deliberate rhythm from every direction, left, right, behind, ahead, as if there were dozens of them, closing in. The fire barely helped, shadows bent in ways that didn't match the flames, stretching long, twisting. And then I saw it, not fully, just a glimpse, a sliver. Between the trees, half lit by firelight, something stood, tall, gaunt, skin the color of wet stone. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as though its neck had grown tired of supporting it. It didn't move. It just stood, watching. My breath froze in my throat. I wanted to run, to leap into the RV and gun the engine, but my body wouldn't obey. The only thing that moved was my eyes locked on that shadow. Then it stepped back. Not forward. Back. Slowly, deliberately, as though reminding me it could come and go as it pleased. And once it was gone, the forest returned to silence. I slept inside with every light on, but the RV felt paper thin, fragile. I woke at every sound, the creak of branches, the groan of settling metal, my own heart hammering in my ears. By the sixth day, I was unraveling. My water jugs were running low, and the stream felt farther away than ever. I kept expecting to see it standing there, waiting for me between the pines. The whole forest smelled damp, like the inside of a cellar, even though the sun was out. My skin itched with sweat and grime, but I didn't dare bathe. Something about showing that kind of vulnerability felt like an invitation. That night, I tried recording. I set my phone against the window, hit record, and let it run while I lay in the dark. I thought maybe if I captured the sound, the knocks, the breathing, I could prove to myself I wasn't losing it. When I played it back the next morning, the audio was warped. Static hissed through most of it, but faintly, beneath the noise, I heard something. A voice. It said my name. Not once. Over and over. Daniel. 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 I dropped the phone like it had burned me. My name sounded wrong, twisted, as though spoken by someone who had never said a human word before. That was the moment dread took over. I wasn't just suspicious anymore. I knew something out there had its eye on me, and it wanted me to know it. On the seventh day, I broke. I packed everything as fast as I could, threw gear into cupboards without caring if they clattered loose, and fired up the RV. My hands shook so bad I could barely turn the key. I told myself I'd risk the road. Better to dent the rig than lose my mind out here. The forest didn't like that decision. The engine roared to life, but the headlights cut only 10 feet before the darkness swallowed them. The gravel road that had seemed so clear coming in now looked different, narrower, twisted, as if it had shifted overnight. Every bend felt sharper, every shadow deeper. Branches scraped against the sides like claws. Half a mile down, I hit something. Not a bump, not a rock, something. The RV lurched violently, throwing me against the wheel. I slammed the brakes, heart pounding. When I climbed out to look, the road was clear, nothing there. But when I turned back to the RV, there were handprints on the door. Muddy, bare, too long, as though someone had pressed their hands flat against the metal while I sat inside. I wanted to scream. Instead, I climbed back in and drove on. My whole body felt like it was vibrating, as if the fear had rewired my nerves. The knocks followed me as I crept down that road, at first faint, echoing in the distance, then closer, then louder. Always 3 knocks, always the same rhythm. By the time I reached the wider shelf where I'd first camped, my courage had shattered. I pulled over, shaking, breath ragged. I thought maybe I should just wait for daylight, but the dread told me daylight wouldn't help. That's when I saw it again. Not outside this time. Inside. In the reflection of the window above my sink, I saw something standing behind me. It wasn't fully formed, more like a smudge of shadow shaped into a body. Tall, lean, head cocked. I spun around with the hatchet raised. Nothing there. The air was damp and cold, my breath fogging inside the RV. I sat on the floor until my legs stopped shaking. My heart felt like it was tearing itself apart. I realized then that escape might not be as simple as driving away. Something had attached itself to me, and the wilderness, vast and indifferent, wasn't going to help. I stayed parked on that shelf for hours, afraid to drive farther, afraid to stay still. The forest pressed in around me. Its silence stretched so tight it felt like it might snap. Every instinct screamed that I wasn't supposed to be there, that I was trespassing on something far older than I could ever understand. But where could I go? I was already deep in. The switchbacks ahead were narrow, and the thought of navigating them in the dark while something trailed me was unbearable. I decided to wait for dawn. I killed the engine, but kept the keys in the ignition. I wanted to believe light would save me. That once the sun rose, whatever haunted me would dissolve like a bad dream. That night was the longest of my life. The knocks came back, louder, sharper, like someone slamming their fists into the walls of the forest. I shut off every light in the RV, crouched in the dark, gripping the hatchet until my palm bled from the handle's edge. My body shook so hard I thought my bones might rattle loose. At 2 a.m., the RV shifted, not from wind, not from me moving. It rocked, slow and deliberate, as though giant hands had pushed it. My heart stopped. I held my breath, waiting for the next push. And it came. Harder. The whole rig tilted, dishes crashing in the cupboards, drawers slamming open. I thought it might roll right off the shelf. Then it stopped. Silence. And then, footsteps. Bare, dragging, circling the RV. The breathing came next, so close I could hear the saliva in the inhale, the faint wetness in the exhale. It pressed against the metal walls, making them feel thinner than paper. That was when panic took over. I didn't care about the road anymore, didn't care if I scraped the sides of the RV down to bare metal. I jumped into the driver's seat, fired up the engine, and slammed the transmission into drive. Gravel spit under the tires as I tore down the road. Branches clawed at the sides, the headlights jittering across the trees. The knocks followed. Somehow, impossibly, I heard them pounding on the trees as I drove, echoing through the night, chasing me down the mountain. The road felt endless. Every bend looked like the last. I gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles split open. My eyes blurred from tears, but I couldn't blink. I kept expecting the headlights to catch that thing standing in the middle of the road, waiting. Finally, after what felt like hours, the gravel gave way to asphalt. My lungs collapsed with relief. I pressed the gas harder, not daring to slow down until I saw a faint glow on the horizon. The first gas station in 50 miles. I pulled in, crooked foot nearly hitting the pumps. My hands shook so violently I could barely turn off the engine. I sat there, forehead against the wheel, sweat soaking my shirt, trying to convince myself I was safe. But when I climbed out, I saw the handprints again. Fresh, wet, smeared across the back of the RV. I didn't sleep that night. I parked under the station's fluorescent lights, the buzzing hum oddly comforting compared to the forest's silence. Every time a truck rolled in, every time the bell above the door jingled, I flinched. But nothing came for me. Not there, not in the open. The next morning, I drove straight to a small town farther south. I needed people, any people. I found a diner, the kind with coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat at the counter. My voice shook when I finally asked the waitress if anyone had ever heard of strange things happening in the Bitterroots. She paused, eyes narrowing just slightly. Then she set the pot down and leaned in. "You went up those forest roads, didn't you?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. She sighed, shaking her head. "Shouldn't have. Folks around here know better. Those aren't roads to camp on. They're paths, and they don't always want company." Her words sank into me like stones. I asked her what she meant, but she only shrugged, muttering something about old stories, about people who wandered too far in and never came out the same. She told me to count myself lucky I'd come back at all. That didn't feel like luck. It felt like unfinished business. Even now, weeks later, I can't shake it. The knocks still echo in my head when the house gets too quiet. Sometimes when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I hear breathing outside the window. Damp, slow, familiar. I've thought about going back. Some twisted part of me wants answers, wants to know what it was that followed me. Was it human once? Was it something born of the forest itself, or was it just me unraveling under the weight of solitude and fear? But then I remember the reflection in the glass, the way it knew my name, the way its hands pressed into the steel of my RV, and I tell myself, some questions don't deserve answers. Some wilderness dangers are meant to stay unseen. Still, if you're ever tempted to push deep into those mountains, to take your RV down a road that looks too lonely to be real, remember this: silence in the wilderness isn't empty. It's watching, it's listening, and sometimes it knocks. I survived because I left. I don't know if I'd be here telling this story if I had stayed one more night. Boondocking can give you freedom, yes, but it can also strip you bare, peel you down to the marrow of who you are. Out there, the line between your mind and the land gets blurry. And when that happens, survival isn't about gear or skill, it's about knowing when to run. And if you hear 3 knocks in the dark, don't wait for the 4th. I didn't tell anyone the full story at first. How could I? People back home would just chalk it up to fatigue or paranoia or too much whiskey by the fire. Even the waitress at that diner, who clearly knew something, hadn't wanted to spell it out. It felt like one of those things people in rural places learn to live with, like a storm system you can't control, only respect. But silence doesn't keep you safe. It just leaves you alone with the memory. And that memory doesn't sit quietly. It grows teeth. In the weeks after, I tried to distract myself with normal routines. Grocery runs, oil changes, laundry, coffee shops, places with people and noise, the kind of mundane clutter that usually dulls the sharper edges of fear. But in every moment of stillness, idling at a red light, standing in line at the store, lying in bed, the wilderness crept back in. My mind replayed the knocks, the smell of damp earth, the sight of handprints smeared across steel. I'd catch myself turning too quickly, convinced someone was standing behind me. One night, while parked in a Walmart lot alongside other RVs, I woke up to the sound of tapping, my chest locked tight. The noise was faint, not the hollow timber knock from the forest, but the sharp, rhythmic click of fingernails against glass. When I snapped the curtain back, there was nothing. Just parking lot lamps glowing dull orange, silhouettes of other campers, asphalt stretching out under a sky too pale to hold stars. I told myself it was a tree branch, though there were no trees. I told myself it was my imagination, though my imagination shouldn't leave condensation marks shaped like fingerprints on the window. The truth is, boondocking in the wilderness didn't just test my survival skills. It rewired me. It made me realize that the most dangerous part of isolation isn't hunger or thirst or even predators. It's the way your mind stops knowing what's real. And once you've let something in, whether it's fear or something darker, you can't always shut it out again. I started researching. Call it obsession or desperation, but I needed to know if what I'd experienced had precedent. I scoured forums for RVers and off-grid campers. Buried in threads about solar setups and water filtration were posts that sounded eerily familiar. People mentioning knocks at night, bare footprints where there should have been none, breathing outside their windows. Some even mentioned the Bitterroots specifically. though they always stopped short of detail, like typing too much might summon it again. One story in particular froze me. A guy from Idaho claimed he'd been camping near Lolo Pass when he woke to his RV rocking. He thought it was a bear until he heard the knocks. 3 of them, deliberate. He fled the next morning, but when he returned months later with friends, they found nothing except a tree with grooves in it, deep as finger marks, in the exact spot where he swore he'd seen something standing. That kind of testimony should have comforted me, proof I wasn't crazy. But it didn't. It just confirmed the thing that had sunk into my bones. What I experienced was real, and it wasn't leaving me alone anytime soon. The next time I went boondocking, I thought I'd outsmart it. I chose desert country, New Mexico, flat mesas, red dust, land stripped bare of trees. I figured whatever haunted the forests couldn't follow me into the open. For the first few nights, it worked. The silence was different there, wide and brittle, the kind that cracks under its own weight. I let the heat bake the fear out of me, convinced I'd left the danger behind, until the 3rd night. The wind had died, leaving the desert eerily still. I sat outside under the stars, sipping from a dented thermos, letting the emptiness soothe me. Then it came. Not a knock, not a breath, but a whistle. Low, drawn out, almost human. My stomach dropped. There were no trees for sound to bounce against, no people for miles. Yet the whistle wound across the desert, curling around me like smoke. It wasn't the same rhythm as the knocks, but it had the same intent. It was deliberate. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I found prints again. Not bare this time, but too large, too deep, pressed into the hard desert crust where no normal foot should leave a mark. They circled the RV in the same pattern. That's when I realized I hadn't escaped anything. I'd only carried it with me. The wilderness doesn't care about boundaries we draw on maps. Forest, desert, mountain, canyon. These are just words we use. The land is older, stranger, and sometimes it doesn't let go once it's noticed you. And maybe that's the lesson. Boondocking is about survival, yes. About water jugs and solar panels, about knowing where to park and when to move on. But it's also about respect, about understanding that when you step off the grid, you're not just escaping society, you're stepping into someone else's territory, someone or something that was there long before you and might be there long after. The danger isn't always the weather or the wildlife or the loneliness. Sometimes the danger is being seen. I think back to that first knock often, like how easy it would have been to laugh it off, to ignore it and stay put. If I'd done that, if I'd dismissed it one more night, I don't think I'd be here telling you this. And that's what I want anyone listening to understand. Trust your instincts out there. If something feels wrong, if the silence presses too hard, if the shadows stretch too long, if you hear a sound that doesn't belong, listen. Don't rationalize it away. Don't let pride root you in place. Move. I made it out of the bitter roots, but not without scars. Some you can't see, some you can't explain. And some, well, sometimes I still hear that whistle at night, even in the middle of a crowded RV park. Maybe it followed me. Maybe it lives inside me now. Or maybe the wilderness just teaches us things we can't unlearn once we've been out there long enough. All I know is this. If you choose the road less traveled, if you take your RV into places where maps blur and signals vanish, remember that you're not just testing yourself, you're making an introduction. And once you've been introduced, you may never truly be alone again. The desert changed me in ways the forest hadn't. Out there, the openness gave no cover. No thick canopy to blame for shadows, no rushing streams to mask strange sounds. Everything stood bare, exposed, honest. And still, something found me. That's when I stopped thinking of it as tied to any one place. It wasn't the Bitterroots. It wasn't the desert. It was something bigger, something that moved with me. One evening, parked along a remote stretch outside of Shiprock, I decided to test it. Fear had eaten enough of me already. I wanted to face it directly, to see if confronting it would break the spell. The wind had died early, leaving the land in stillness so heavy it seemed pressed down from above. I set a lantern outside the RV and sat in the dirt, my hatchet in one hand and my recorder in the other. I spoke aloud, voice trembling but steady enough to carry. I know you're here. You've been following me. I don't want this anymore. If you've got something to say it now. The desert answered with silence. Minutes stretched into an hour. The lantern hissed, moths pinging against its glass. My nerves frayed until exhaustion threatened to smother the fear. I started to believe nothing would happen, that maybe I'd been a fool to give it this kind of power. And then, softly, the whistle rose again. Not from the distance this time, but behind me. I froze, every muscle locking tight. The recorder slipped from my hand, thudding softly in the dirt. The whistle grew clearer, sharper, until it resolved into something worse. Words. Daniel. The voice was warped, cracked, as if spoken through lungs that hadn't tasted air in centuries. My own name came back at me, stretched thin and wrong, like hearing yourself on a broken tape. I spun, hatchet raised, but nothing stood there. Just the desert, wide and empty. Yet the smell hit me, the same damp earth that had clung to me in Montana, impossibly strong in the dry New Mexico dust. I staggered back into the RV, slammed the door, and pressed my back to it. My chest heaved, heart punching against bone. I told myself it was a hallucination, that solitude and stress had finally unraveled me. But then I saw the recorder light still blinking in the dirt outside. When I played it back the next morning, the audio was warped but undeniable. A low whistle, my name, repeated 3 times. That was the moment suspicion died and dread fully took over. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't alone. I drove for hours that day, refusing to stop until the highway grew crowded with semis and billboards. The comfort of civilization dulled the fear, but it never erased it. At every gas stop, I felt eyes on me. At every diner, I caught myself staring at reflections in the glass, waiting to see a shadow standing behind me again. The strangest part was how ordinary people seemed oblivious. Life went on as normal. Families bought groceries, kids laughed over milkshakes, truckers swapped stories in the corner booths. I wanted to shake them, to scream, "Don't you feel it? Don't you know something's out there?" But I kept quiet. Fear like mine doesn't translate in bright daylight. It only lives in the dark. I started journaling, trying to keep myself tethered. I wrote down every detail I could remember, the knocks, the handprints, the smell, the voice. Writing gave me a false sense of control, like documenting it might contain it. But some nights when I reread the entries, the ink seemed to blur. Words I knew I'd written shifted, rearranged themselves, forming sentences I couldn't remember putting down. You can't leave. You're already part of it. Knocks are only the beginning. I tore those pages out, burned them, but the words stuck in my head anyway. It wasn't just about being followed anymore. It was about being changed. Weeks later, I took a job out near Flagstaff, fixing fences for a rancher in exchange for hookups and steady ground. I thought work might ground me again. But the first night, lying in the bunk of the RV, I felt it. Not outside this time, but inside. The air shifted. Dampness spread through the rig, condensing on the windows as though I'd parked in a swamp instead of the high desert. The temperature dropped until my breath fogged, and in the reflection of the darkened window, I saw it again. Tall, bent, watching. I spun, and it was gone. But the smell lingered, clinging to my clothes, my hair, my skin. I scrubbed myself raw in the shower, but it wouldn't wash away. That's when panic truly set in. Because you can outrun a road, you can leave a forest behind. But what do you do when the danger climbs inside with you? When it carries your name on its tongue, when it slips into your lungs every time you breathe? I told the rancher I had to go. I made up excuses about family emergencies, health problems, anything to avoid telling him the truth. He didn't ask questions, just wished me luck. People out here are good at recognizing when something doesn't want to be spoken. I drove without a map, without a plan. Just movement. As if distance might dull the grip. But no matter where I stopped, the desert, the plains, even busy campgrounds, it always came back. Maybe not every night, but often enough to remind me I wasn't free. A knock against the frame of the RV, a whistle winding through the air vents, a smear of mud on the handle I'd cleaned spotless the night before. That's when reflection began to set in. What if this wasn't about danger at all? What if it was about attention, about acknowledgement? Something out there noticed me, and in noticing, it made me part of it. Maybe I'd already crossed the threshold, already joined something older than my understanding. Survival, I realized, wasn't just about food and water anymore. It was about boundaries, about deciding how much of yourself you let the wilderness take. And I don't know if I'm winning that fight, but I do know this. If you take your RV into the wild, if you boondock where no signal reaches, where the silence grows so heavy it bends, you're not just out there with yourself, you're out there with everything that land remembers. And land remembers more than we ever will. So if you hear your name in the dark, don't answer. I used to think fear was just a signal, an alarm bell the body rings when something's wrong, something you could respond to, fix, escape. But now I know fear can become a companion. It doesn't just warn you, it follows you, sits beside you, grows roots in your mind. That's what happened after the desert. Fear wasn't something outside anymore. It was inside me, whispering, reminding me of every knock, every breath, every reflection I'd seen. By late October, I was parked outside of Durango, Colorado, on BLM land overlooking a valley of aspens turned gold. The view was perfect. From my door, I could see peaks rising like teeth, the air so crisp it almost stung when I breathed. But even beauty can't smother dread when it's already taken hold. I lasted 2 nights before the knocks came again. This time, they weren't outside. They were underneath. I woke to the sound of something rapping against the undercarriage of my RV. Hollow thuds, steady, like someone crawling beneath me with their fists. I froze in bed, staring at the ceiling, too afraid to move. The mattress vibrated with each knock. When I finally gathered the courage to look, I crouched down with a flashlight, aimed it at the floor vents. Nothing, just empty space. But the smell was there, the same damp, earthy stench that had followed me across states. By morning, I was running on fumes, sleep-deprived, nerves frayed. I checked under the RV. No prints, no drag marks, no disturbed soil, just a few pine needles stuck in the wheel wells. But I couldn't ignore the fact that I'd felt the vibration. I couldn't ignore the smell. I tried telling myself it was rodents. Pack rats are common in Colorado, crawling under vehicles, while chewing wires. I clung to that explanation like a drowning man clings to driftwood. But rodents don't whisper your name. That night, the whispers began. Not outside, not in reflections, but directly through the vents. My name, low and slow, rising with each exhale of stale air. Daniel, Daniel, Daniel. I shoved towels into every vent, sealed the airways, but the sound seeped through anyway, as if it wasn't bound by walls or barriers, as if it had found a way inside me that no metal could block. I started pacing. I couldn't sit still, couldn't lie down. Every shadow felt like it had weight pressing against my shoulders. The RV, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. By dawn, I made another decision. I'd head to civilization. A campground with hookups, noise, families, anything to dilute the isolation. I drove to a KOA outside of town, parked between 2 massive Class A rigs, and told myself I was safe. I could hear kids shouting in the pool, smell burgers cooking at the communal grills. For the first time in weeks, I almost believed I'd shaken it, until I noticed the other campers avoiding me. At first, it was subtle. A glance held too long, a parent calling their kid away when they wandered near my sight. Then it grew sharper. People whispered when I walked past. One evening, while I sat outside with a coffee, I caught a man pointing at my rig, murmuring something to his wife. When I confronted him, he just shook his head. "Your RV smells," he said flatly. I stiffened. "Smells?" "Like rot," he muttered. "Like wet earth. We don't want it near our kids." Then he walked away, pulling his wife with him. That was the moment I realized it wasn't just me anymore. Whatever had attached itself wasn't staying invisible. Other people could sense it. If not see it, then at least smell it. The smell that had followed me since Montana was seeping into everything I touched. I left the KOA the next morning, humiliated, terrified. If normal people were starting to notice, how long until it stopped hiding completely? How long until it showed itself in plain daylight? The dread kept building. I stopped keeping track of days. I drove aimlessly, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, never staying in one place more than a night. The gas receipts piled up. My eyes grew hollow in the mirror. Every time I thought I might be free, the knocks came back. Sometimes distant, sometimes close enough to rattle silverware in the cupboards. The worst night came outside of Ely, Nevada. I'd pulled into a gravel lot near an abandoned mine, too tired to keep driving. The wind whipped dust against the windows, whistling through cracks in the seals. I thought maybe the noise would drown it out. But then, at 3 a.m., the RV started rocking again. Not like before, harder this time, violent, as though someone wanted to tip it completely. I braced myself against the wall, hatchet clutched in my hand, heart slamming against my ribs. And then, over the roar of wind and the groan of metal, I heard it. A laugh. Not a human laugh. Too deep, too broken, like someone imitating joy without understanding it. The sound vibrated through the floor, up into my bones, until my teeth ached. I snapped. I screamed into the dark. What do you want from me? The rocking stopped. Silence swallowed everything. My own voice echoed back, pathetic, small. And then came the answer, whispered against the glass so close I could see the fog of its breath. Stay. That was it. One word. Clear. Human-shaped, but wrong in its cadence. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I sat in the driver's seat with the engine running, headlights pointed at the empty lot, waiting for dawn. By morning, I was shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I drove until I hit Reno, has parked at a crowded casino lot, and collapsed into the noise of people and machines. The chaos gave me cover, gave me space to breathe. But even there, with neon lights flashing and music blasting from speakers, I knew it hadn't ended. Because when I looked down at my arm, I saw dirt under my fingernails. Not the dust of Nevada. Dark, wet soil, the kind you only find deep in the woods. And I hadn't touched the ground in days. That dirt under my fingernails haunted me more than any knock, more than any whisper. It wasn't just residue, it was proof. Proof that whatever this was, it wasn't staying outside anymore. It had found its way into me, into my body. I tried washing it off in the casino restroom, scrubbing until my hands bled, but it clung stubbornly, packed beneath the nails like it belonged there. When I finally managed to clean them, I thought I was free, until the next morning when I woke to find the dirt back again. Dark, wet, reeking of rot, streaked across my palms as though I'd spent the night digging. But I hadn't. At least, not that I remembered. That was when suspicion turned inward. Maybe I wasn't just being followed. Maybe I was becoming part of it. I left Reno in a panic, driving until my eyes blurred from exhaustion. I don't even remember most of the miles, just the endless white lines splitting the asphalt, the mountains rising like walls on either side. Eventually, I pulled off onto another forest road, somewhere outside of Lawson, California. The irony wasn't lost on me. After everything, I'd driven straight back into the trees. I told myself it was temporary, just a place to crash for a few hours before daylight. But as soon as I parked, I felt it. The silence pressed heavy again, thick and alive. The pines leaned close, their bark slick with dew as though they were listening. That night, I dreamed. In the dream, I was barefoot, walking through a forest floor soft with moss. My hands were caked in soil, my fingernails ragged. Ahead of me, between the trunks, I saw movement. A tall figure, bent-necked, waiting. It didn't move toward me. It just pointed, to the ground. I looked down and saw a hole, freshly dug, wide enough for me to fit inside. I woke gasping, sweat freezing on my skin. My hands were covered in dirt again. This time not just under the nails, but across the palms, under the wrists, smeared on my sheets. I ran outside with my flashlight, half expecting to find a hole near the RV. And I did. Just 20 feet from the rig, a pit had been dug into the earth, shallow but wide. The soil was damp and loose, clawed up in handfuls. My stomach flipped as the truth settled in. I had dug it. In my sleep, or something had used me to dig it. The stench of rot rose from that hole, heavy and wet like the breath I'd smelled outside my window weeks before. I dropped the light and stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. Panic drove me to the wheel again. I didn't care about sleep, didn't care about the road. I needed to put miles between me and that hole. I drove until dawn, until the gas tank screamed near empty, until my eyelids weighed too much to hold open. When I finally stopped, it was in another Walmart lot surrounded by strangers' rigs. I thought maybe being close to others would protect me. But even there, sleep betrayed me. The next dream came sharper, clearer. I stood in the same forest, the same figure watching. But this time, the hole wasn't empty. This time, something was inside. Me. I saw my own body lying at the bottom of the pit, eyes open, mouth filled with soil. And the figure knelt beside it, pressing one long wet hand against my chest, whispering my name. I woke screaming, sweat soaking the mattress. A couple in the rig next to me banged on the wall, yelling for me to quiet down. I didn't care. My hands were filthy again. The dirt clung wet and heavy, smelling of the same rot. That's when I stopped denying it. I wasn't just being followed. I wasn't just being haunted. I was being claimed. The wilderness, or whatever lived in it, had chosen me. And the more I resisted, the deeper it dug its claws. For days, I drifted in a fog, eat, drive, collapse, dream. Always the same sequence, always the same hole waiting. Sometimes deeper, sometimes filled, always mine. I stopped answering texts, stopped calling friends. What could I say? That the forest was teaching me how to dig my own grave, that it breathed through my lungs when I slept? No one would understand. I grew thin, hollow-eyed. My reflection in the bathroom mirror no longer looked like me. The skin sagged, the eyes sunken, and sometimes, just sometimes when I blinked, I thought I saw something else staring back, taller, gaunter, head tilted unnaturally to one side. I thought about ending it myself, driving the RV into a canyon, walking into the woods and never coming back. But every time I reached that edge, I felt it. That presence pressing close, whispering through the vents. Stay. And I realized ending it might not even matter. If it had already made me part of it, what would death change? The worst part wasn't the fear anymore. It was the familiarity. The way my body had started to expect the knocks, the whispers, the dirt, the way dread began to feel like routine. I don't know what's worse, being haunted or belonging. By the time I crossed back into Montana, winter had begun to press its fingers into the land. Frost clung to the edges of the asphalt each morning, the pines stiff with ice. My breath curled white in the cab as I drove, the heater straining to keep up. I didn't know why I'd returned here, except that some invisible cord had been pulling me back the whole time. The Bitterroots had started this, and I felt like they were the only place it could end. I parked at the same shelf I'd used on my first night, all those months ago. The road was empty, silent except for the crunch of gravel under my tires. The air smelled sharp with snow and pine sap. For the first time in weeks, the damp, rotting smell wasn't there. My heart thudded with cautious hope. Maybe it was over. Maybe I'd broken free by coming back. I stepped outside, boots sinking into frozen soil. The mountains rose on every side, pale and immense, their ridges lost in clouds. I walked to the edge of the shelf and looked down at the dark swath of forest below. The sound of water rushing in the unseen canyon carried up faintly, a soft hiss under the wind. I stood there a long time, the cold burning my cheeks, the silence pressing around me like a waiting breath. Then, without warning, it started again. 3 knocks. Not far. Not hidden. Right behind me. I turned slowly, dread rooting me to the spot. There it stood. No more glimpses. No more smudged reflections. The thing that had followed me across deserts and plains now stood fully revealed at the edge of my campsite. It was taller than I'd imagined, easily 7 feet, its limbs long and thin as stripped branches, skin gray and slick like river stones, its head tilted to one side the way it had in every reflection, neck bending too far for a human, and its hands, long fingers ending in blunt, soil-caked tips, hung at its sides, twitching as if testing the air. The smell of rot hit me like a blow. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hatchet lay inside the RV, but I knew even if I held it, it would be useless. This wasn't something you could fight. It stepped forward, slow and deliberate, feet sinking into the frozen ground without sound. Its mouth opened, not wide, but just enough to let a wet, rattling breath escape. And then it spoke. Stay. The word rolled through me like a tide, deeper than sound, vibrating in my bones. It wasn't a command this time, it was an invitation. Something inside me cracked. All the fear, the running, the exhaustion, gone. In their place, a strange calm rose, thick and heavy. My hands stopped trembling, my heartbeat slowed, and for the first time I realized how tired I was, how much I wanted to stop. But another part of me, small, stubborn human, fought to the surface. The part that had driven me across miles of wilderness, that had refused to give in even when the nights pressed so tight I could barely breathe. That part whispered, "If you stay, you're gone." I forced myself to speak. My voice came out thin and cracked, but it carried. No. The creature's head tilted farther, an unnatural angle, eyes glinting like wet stone. The smell of soil thickened. I stepped backward toward the RV, each movement slow, deliberate. The ground seemed to hold me, pulling at my boots, but I kept moving. "No," I said again louder. The creature hissed, a sound like wind tearing through a dead tree. Its fingers flexed, long tips curling inward. For a heartbeat, I thought it would leap, drag me into the trees. But instead it stopped. Its head tilted back to center. It stared at me, unblinking, unreadable. And then it took a step back. Another. It began to retreat into the trees, each movement smooth and fluid until the shadows swallowed it whole. The smell faded, the silence remained. I didn't waste a second. I ran into the RV, slammed the door, started the engine. My hands shook as I shifted into drive, but this time the road felt clear. The switchback steady under my tires. No knocks followed, no whispers. Just the sound of my engine echoing off the cold stone walls of the mountains. I didn't stop driving until I reached Missoula again, sunlight breaking through a thin veil of clouds. I parked at a crowded truck stop, sat at the wheel, and let the noise of idling semis wash over me. My whole body ached as though I'd been holding my breath for months. For the first time since that first knock, I felt lighter. That was weeks ago. I haven't gone boondocking since. I stay in established campgrounds now, always near people, always where I can hear voices at night. The smell has faded from my clothes, my nails stay clean, the dreams have stopped. But sometimes in the middle of the night, I wake up to silence so deep it presses against my eardrums. And for a moment, just a moment, I think I hear it. The faintest echo of 3 knocks, somewhere far off. Like a reminder, like a promise. Boondocking taught me freedom, yes. But it also taught me the cost of forgetting where you are. The wilderness isn't empty. It remembers, it watches, and if you push too far, it will push back. So if you're listening to this, planning your own off-grid escape, take my story as a warning. Pack your water, your solar, your maps. But more than that, pack your instincts. Listen to the quiet, respect it, and if you ever hear 3 knocks in the dark, don't wait for the 4th. Run. Because survival out there isn't about strength, it's about knowing when to leave. And always remember, some parts of the wilderness don't just want you to visit, they want you to stay.